Is there anyone listening out there? Other than my sister who entered the chat. Charlie and mandatory myocarditis. What an interesting name. I'm going to start this up in about 1 minute. Hey, John Roland. What's up, my man? He's a speaker, part of this event. Look at that Nightbot on the chat from my Twitch channel. So I'm actually streaming on 2 platforms right now. I'm streaming from both YouTube and Twitch. Usually I only stream on Twitch, but I want to stream on YouTube. They both have relatively similar guidelines. Certain things. Actually, Twitch is more strict on certain things, apparently, but we're going to be featuring some talks. That's what we're going to be doing. So, hello, how it is? How is it? How is it? So, I figured I'd just do a little bit of an intro, but basically, the way that I'm just going to be streaming each and every single day is pretty free-flowing, but for the most part, it's going to be sharing a lot of the content from the summit. And the summit I refer to is the End of Slavery Summit, a very powerful event with a lot of speakers and a lot of great people. And I created several introductory videos. Last night I actually played a premiere of some of the speakers, some little snippets, and how it works, and how you can sign up. And I recommend checking out the premiere if you haven't already. It's pretty epic. But I will be showing, for just to get right into it, the summit speakers and their full-out interviews on this live stream. So if, in case you haven't watched the speakers, you can watch them now. You can watch them live with the chat, and if you want, you can also type in the chat or what have you. You can also watch on Twitch. You don't have to just watch on YouTube, okay? I know that if you're watching on mobile, you might want to watch on Twitch, because then you don't get kicked out of the app if you put it on the background. I know YouTube will kick you out unless you pay for YouTube. Just something to keep in mind. And of course, Twitch is somewhere I usually stream, but I figured I could stream on YouTube. And I'll probably do it more often as time moves on. But it's nice to see you all. Nice to see you all, you guys. And I figured we can just hop right into it. But the reason why I'd say it's a little free-flowing is because during the live stream, and depending on who's watching and what's going on, or if somebody messages me and they're like, hey, I want to come on, maybe we'll have some guests and maybe we'll make an actual live stream. We'll maybe play some games or something, who knows. But for the most part, each day is just going to be showing the interviews and the content from the summit. So enjoy. Thank you, guys.
Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. This is Cory and I'm here with a very special interview with somebody who's a great inspiration of mine, Mark Passio. In this interview, we're going to go and dive deep into what it means to say that government is slavery. Now, this is a very powerful term that Mark Passio and myself use as a means to show that slavery still exists through political slavery, as many abolitionists of the past were also warning us. But we're going to dive deep into breaking this down and finding out what it really means, because this is crucial. A lot of people are participating in governments or in creating governments and don't realize that when they want to limit government, they don't even know how to do that in the first place, or what it even means to try to limit government. So this interview is going to be world-breaking, very important. I recommend staying tuned to watch this whole thing. I'm joined by my co-host Aaron Butler for this. This is great. I hope you can stay tuned and watch the whole thing. Thank you very much for watching.
It shows a lot of initiative for putting together an event of this scope, this scale, and that's what doing the great work is all about, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you guys for doing something like this.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive deep, if you don't mind. Could you define for us what is slavery?
At the very core essence, slavery is the claim of ownership over another being in any form or fashion. If you are making a claim that another being must or must not do things based upon your own will and your own commands toward them, and you are doing things like confiscating their labor in whole or in part, controlling and restricting their movement in any way, controlling or restricting their speech, etc. Now, this is barring that they are actively and actually initiating harm to you or another being. Then you always retain and maintain the natural right to stop them from performing those actions. That is not what we're talking about. That's self-defense. That is not what we're talking about when it comes to the claim of ownership on another being. So it's very easy to see overt slavery. Overt slavery comes in the form of things like chattel slavery, which we saw in this country back a couple hundred years ago in the colonial days, and all the way up through the Civil War era period. That is very easy to recognize as slavery, because the beings who are being held in captivity are held there by direct, active, visible violence. They're being held in that position by weaponry, by people with weaponry, those who are actively claiming openly to be their owners, and they and the other people who are witnessing the situation overtly can see that this is a scenario where certain beings are claiming to own other beings, and those beings who are being claimed to be property are not free to do as they please, even if they are not harming someone else, if they're not initiating aggression or harm against another being. So it's very easy to see, for human beings to see and recognize overt forms of slavery. When we're talking about the form of slavery that is the largest form of slavery that is active today, we're not talking about overt slavery. Does overt slavery continue to exist in our world? Absolutely, yes, it does. Unfortunately, in certain places, in many places, and that's horrifically deplorable, and that practice should not be allowed to continue. It should be stopped by any amount of force necessary to stop it wherever it's taking place. But what we're largely talking about in an event such as this, and in the freedom movement in general, for those who do deeply understand slavery, there is a form of slavery that is a little bit, or for many people, much harder to see, much more difficult to perceive, and that is covert slavery. Covert slavery works through mental forms of manipulation to get the people who are having a claim of ownership made upon their person or their property, their body or their property, um, to influence them to believe that that situation is acceptable, justifiable, or even moral, or even necessary, that it must be that way and it must continue. And this is the most dangerous form of slavery. Covert slavery is even a more devastatingly dangerous form of slavery, because in overt slavery, no one with a sensible moral compass actually believes that the situation is justifiable. I would certainly hope that today, in today's world, with the information that is available, no one believes that genuinely one being has the right to go and capture and enslave and put to work as they see fit another human being. And if they did, they're pretty psychopathic. They're psychopaths out in the open. Most people don't believe that overt slavery is moral or justifiable. They know that it is violence. They know that it is a wrong behavior that should not be conducted against anyone. The problem lies in covert slavery. Covert slavery convinces people that the situation that is actually a violent scenario where people are being held under the threat, the continued threat of violence, which is called duress, if they do not obey the commands of the master class, the those who are making the claims of ownership, that physical violence will be done to the people who do not obey those dictates, those commands that they call laws. And the form of covert slavery that is active in our world today, called government, convinces people that the situation that they are unjustly being held under, which is duress, is not only okay, is not only justifiable, that it is actually moral and necessary to prevent some form of chaos or destruction or implosion, or collapse of society from happening. When in fact, that is all brainwashing, that is all propaganda, that is all social engineering that has been done to people since birth to get them to believe that that violent and immoral scenario is actually a moral one that is actually necessary to continue. And that's the most dangerous form of slavery there is, as far as I am concerned. And that is because in an overt form of slavery, you could ask people, do those people have the right to do that type of violence to other people and hold them in that condition and hold them under that form of continued threat of violence? And again, the vast overwhelming majority of human beings are going to say, absolutely not, they don't have such a right. That is thuggery. That is absolute violence. But then if you ask people, well, does government have a right to exist, and do they have the rights that they claim that they have over other people as authorities? You know, people will go, oh, absolutely they do. So the social engineer class of beings that runs this whole structure of our world has convinced the vast majority of human beings that covert slavery is perfectly acceptable, that all the forms of violence conducted in that system of covert slavery is just justifiable and even moral and even necessary. And it's because people don't go down to fundamental first principles and apply the action, the behavior to themselves. This is what people have a problem, an issue, a block of some kind. You could call it a mental virus of some sort that has been installed in their psyche. They have some block about applying a behavior that other people are doing, often even to them, to their own selves, to apply that behavior to themselves and ask themselves the question, if you performed this behavior, would you consider that you were doing a moral action? And would it be okay and would it be justifiable if you performed that behavior? This is the missing link that most people in the world do not do. They do not envision the scenario. They don't visualize the scenario reversed. If you were doing this to another human being, what behavior would you expect back from that individual upon yourself? Would you expect them to defend themselves? Would you expect, possibly deadly force used against you, were you to take this kind of violent behavior? And that's the reason they don't really see the behavior for what it is. They've had installed into their psyche and into their mental processes malware. It's like computer malware. It's a virus, and that virus is the basis of all forms of modern covert slavery. And that virus is called authority. The belief in authority is what prevents most people in the modern day from perceiving covert slavery as slavery. They believe that these people have a right that does not exist. They believe that people have the right to do these behaviors, which in nature, in point of fact reality, in the natural realm, those beings do not have the right to perform. They have simply claimed the right to perform those behaviors, but the right does not exist in nature. And that is why people are confused about the legitimacy, the moral legitimacy of authority, when in fact they shouldn't be confused about it, because if they understood natural law, if they understood what all of our equal natural rights are. Notice I did not say we don't have equal natural abilities, but we all have equal natural rights. That means equality under our rights under natural law, not equality in the characteristics of our beings and our personalities. Of course, everyone is different in that regard, but we are all the same in the rights that we have, that we can perform without initiating violence to other. All human beings have the same rights. And what authority teaches you through the social engineering that installs that malware, that virus into the human psyche, is that some people have rights that other people do not possess. And that is a lie. That is an untruth. That is falsity. Okay. And this is what people have to work to do. They have to work to be able to see the covert form of slavery, government, through authority, through the belief in authority, by learning objective morality and learning what rights actually are. What rights does an individual human being possess to perform? They have the right to perform actions that do not initiate harm or violence to other sentient beings. And that is the same for all beings on this planet, all human beings on this planet. Okay, again, natural law doesn't really, operate the way that it does in the human kingdom in the animal kingdom. Animals don't have the types of brains and minds and psyches that we have, and that type of mind imparts the capabilities of understanding the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior, which is why natural law applies to human beings and not the animal kingdom, that is at a different, and what many would just say a less complexified level of consciousness than human beings possess at this time in our evolutionary development. So the goal is to get this mental virus purged from the psyche of human beings, that there is such a thing as authority over other beings. Authority is a claim, and specifically, it is a claim of one being or one group of being are saying they have the right to issue commands to other beings. Now, what if we fundamentally break that down? The right to issue commands of compliance to other beings, that you must do this behavior. Well, what are you going to do the behavior with? You're not going to do the behavior with a magic wand, You're going to do the behavior with your body, right? So if I claim that your actions must comply to my demands, then I am indirectly making a second claim. I am making the covert, indirect claim that what you perform with your body is not up to you. It is up to me to decide that behavior, and then I command it upon you, and then I do violence to you, or I send people to do violence to you if you don't comply with that command. Okay, so what am I indirectly claiming ownership of? I'm not just claiming ownership of your actions, because indirectly, by proxy, if I claim ownership of your actions, I must claim ownership of your body, because that is what you perform your actions with. So that is why all forms of authority, all forms of issuance of commands to other people is a claim of ownership upon the body, and it is therefore slavery. If you simply look at what government is not suggestions to other people. Government is commands of compliance through laws created by lawmaking bodies of people, claiming to be authorities who can create law and bind that law upon other people, therefore making the claim of ownership over their behavior and thus their bodies. By definition, logically, we just followed the logical sequence of philosophical progression of what the actual behaviors are, what the actual definitions of the words are, and therefore, by definition, definitively, factually, and objectively, government not only is slavery, by definition of authority, which is what government claims, it must be slavery. And therefore, it is an immoral situation. It is a situation by which people are held under the threat of violence and duress. And therefore, that immoral situation should not be allowed to continue and stand. It must be ended by human beings who claim to be moral beings and who claim to have a moral compass. So that is what, my whole mission in this life has become, is explaining that to other people from a philosophical perspective, and hopefully getting them to understand that and then teach that to other people, so we can spread that philosophical truth and end this immoral situation that we're all unfortunately currently living under.
A lot of stuff there. If I may, I wanted to read one of your slides from
Sure.
your fake ass Christians presentation.
Sure.
And it says, God's plan for everyone, the great work to end slavery. It is our shared responsibility at this time to help awaken others by continuously speaking the truth unapologetically, even if we feel burdened by this task, and even if it makes all of those involved feel uncomfortable. Courage and persistence are required to perform this task. The true great work is the arduous task of influencing others to awaken to the truth. It is to help them to realize that in supporting and condoning the legitimacy of authority and government, man's law, that they have actually been supporting and condoning the legitimacy of slavery, and that they were immoral for having done so. In short, what the great work comes down to is to help people abandon their false religions, the erroneous and dogmatic beliefs which hold back the progress of consciousness by impeding the reception of truth and natural law. And I want to follow that with a question.
Sure.
Uh, in your Streetwise spirituality presentation, you said the first step, or the first the first note that you took when in people actually being awake was knowing about the occult and understanding that there are both light and dark aspects to it. How does knowledge of the occult help others awaken to covert slavery?
So, in the world of occultism, first we should simply define occult and occultism. The word occult comes from the Latin language, from the verb occultare, which means to hide, to conceal, or to keep secret. The verb itself, occultare, comes from the Latin noun oculus, which means eye. It means the ability to see, specifically the ability to see that which is difficult to see with the five senses. It has to be perceived with the mind. The sixth sense is truly the ability to think, comprehend, and understand what reality is and how it works. And that is what occultism attempts to convey to people. The laws of nature, those which are difficult to see with the eye and with traditional scientific measuring instrumentation. They are not physical quantities in the same sense that we measure forces like electromagnetism or gravity or dynamic forces, through motion at work in the world. Those are quantifiable, measurable, very visible. When it comes to moral truths about what actions are right and which actions are wrong, that doesn't have a measuring stick applied to it. That has to be philosophized and thought through logically and thought out to its logical conclusion. And a lot of people don't have the tool sets to do that. Occultism, meaning the psychological and mental tool sets of literally being able to logically think out a progression and apply it to morality and a moral situation. Occultism attempts to convey those tools to people. And unfortunately, that is one of the reasons that it has been kept hidden. It is a grand leveler of sorts. In the occult tradition, Freemasonry, they call death the grand leveler, right? But the grand leveler of the chessboard of life is the ability to really learn how to think logically and to see things for what they really are, not to react emotionally, not to simply accept the mental malware that has been given to us by the social engineer class, who are occultists. They are dark occultists who are trying to keep human consciousness at a low level so that it doesn't wake up and it doesn't perceive the slavery that we are all embedded in. My general definition that I use for occultism is one that has been accepted in the occult circles and in the occult realm for quite some time. Occultism simply is the study of the hidden laws of nature, those which cannot readily be seen with the eyes or with scientific instrumentation alone. It has to be fleshed out philosophically and morally, these truths. About behavior is what largely occultism is all about. The very deepest embedded nugget of gold in the whole realm of occult thought and occult philosophy is natural law. It is the understanding of what human rights are, what human rights are not. It is the understanding of what our property actually is, what we may claim ownership of, and what we may not claim ownership of because it is not our property. It is the understanding of all of the moral laws of the universe that actually govern the consequences of what happens to us individually and societally. And it largely operates over the aggregate of a body of people. People think that karmic law, which is another name for natural law, works in the second, like instant karma. You do something bad, something immediately bad happens to you. Unfortunately, that's an oversimplified and childish view of consciousness, not conscience, of karma. And it is a little bit more complexified than that. It actually truly works over a whole body of a population, the aggregate of society, and then it works over large periods of time, not very short orders of time. It takes a while for the consequential buildup and development that is then going to be given back to the body of the people. And that is going to be the situation, the environment that we then must live in. So we don't immediately make our bed and lie down in it. Collectively, in the aggregate, we all make our aggregate collective bed called the earth, called all of human global society. And then we all have to lay down in it eventually over time. That's how natural law and karma really works to bring us the consequences of all of our aggregate collective behavior. And I summarize it simply that the aggregate morality of a population is going to be directly proportional to the aggregate freedom of a population. It's a mathematical equation because the laws of creation aren't personal forces. It's another thing that people have a very difficult time with the world of the occult, what it teaches, what natural law is, and how it operates. We've been very conditioned to see things in religious contexts, meaning personal higher forces, personal gods, personal laws that are implemented by those personal gods, and that is not really how the justice conserving machine of consciousness that is the universe really operates. It operates through impersonal forces. Does it have a preferred outcome? Yes, it does. So that it also implies a consciousness. I'm not saying that the universe has no consciousness like a machine. I'm saying its laws operate like a machine, because for perfect justice to exist, there can't be partiality. It has a preferred outcome, meaning it wants people to go along with the laws of creation, of morality, and behave morally and get good consequences, good created results. That's the real law of attraction. How we behave is what creates the results that we experience. And the universe has a preferred outcome. It wants goodness. It wants optimum outcome. It wants evolution. It wants further consciousness, higher level consciousness, more differentiation of forms and of thought, and growing that continually and complexifying it continually and making much more beauty in the world and goodness in the universe in general. However, it has to be impartial, and therefore it is going to allow anything. It's not going to step in and intervene, because then nothing is learned. Then it's supporting us, and it's not allowing us to grow individually through our own expression of consciousness and our own learning and growth. Our learning and growth, the universe wants it to be self-directed, and indeed it demands it to be self-directed. That's why no external power will step in to save us from ourselves. The savior myth and savior complex comes from traditional forms of religion, which are all there to stop us from actually learning and growing and doing autodidactic, meaning self-directed learning about how the forces of the natural world work and how the laws of the universe work, and integrating that into our own being, coming into alignment with those laws and forces, and then growing. That's what true evolution in consciousness is. I'm not talking about what is traditionally looked at as Darwinian evolution. That I don't necessarily subscribe to in the form that it is put out to us. But I'm talking about true evolution in consciousness, in knowledge, in understanding, in morality, etc. That is what our real goal here is to do as beings. That this is the purpose of being here on this planet and having a body and living human life. It's one of the grand purposes of it. A lot of people have not discovered that. A lot of people are floating through life without a purpose. A lot of people don't accept the existence of natural law. They don't accept the existence of morality. They're moral relativists. That's another thing that comes out of the teachings of occultism, that moral relativism can only lead to a state of total confusion when it comes to understanding what is right and wrong, and therefore you don't get the results that you say you want on the other side of the equation. Because if it's all relative, and there's no such thing as truth, and there's no such thing as morality, and morality we can get to make up. That's what man's law is, moral relativism. It's like you can do this behavior here, but you can't do it here. So, you can open carry a firearm without a license in one state. If you open carry a firearm in another state in the United States, you can go to jail for 10 years, right? So who's correct? The law is obviously relative, because in one place it's one thing and in another place it's another thing. Well, does that logically make sense philosophically and morally? Of course it doesn't. That's a huge crock of BS. Okay. What it really is one state has it correct because they are honoring the actual natural law. I'm not saying that makes them correct for existing as government, right? But they're factually correct that people do have the right to put a firearm on their body and carry it openly or concealed, whatever they choose, right? You have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to defend yourself. You don't have a right to commit violence, but you have a right to defend yourself with weaponry if you choose. The state that says we'll throw you in 10 years if we find you carrying a firearm open or concealed without our permit, our permission, which is what permits are, commands of compliance that we'll do violence to if you don't comply with, they're incorrect morally. And, some states can do different variations of it and say, well, you can do this, in these cities, but not in these cities. And it's all gradations of being wrong, right? The goal is to actually be factually correct about rights. See, that's why they're called rights. See, right correctness and right morality are one and the same, essentially. When you are incorrect factually, that leads you to incorrect or immoral behavior. That's why we use the same word, right, to mean both factually correct and in alignment with moral principles. They are both right. And we use the word wrong, meaning both factually incorrect and immoral, out of alignment with moral principles. So it's very interesting how the English language evolved to reflect that in those words. And it reflects the actual truth of the matter. That is why we have to be correct about what our rights are and are not. That's why we have to be correct about, does authority actually exist in nature, or is it only a claim of certain people who want power over other people and want to do excuse me, want to do violence to them, whether directly or indirectly through order followers. Again, the real ruling class of our world does not do the violence directly. This is another big principle. And it's another thing that occultism will help you to understand. They want to be insulated as much as possible from the very intense moral culpability that the universe, that the natural law is going to hold them according to. It's going to hold them to that standard. So they want to isolate their behavior from it as much as possible. And so what they do is they only issue the commands verbally or on paper. They very rarely, if ever, bloody their own hands. You will notice that. And it's not so much that they are just cowards. Yes, the real rulers of our world, of our society, are cowards. I would call them cowards directly to their face, because they are. They don't want to get their hands dirty. Most of them are weaklings that if literally you punched them, they would turn to dust. Okay, that is how much of bodily weaklings they are. You'd break their bones, you'd shatter their bones to dust. Okay, certainly if I hit them, they would. Okay, and what I'm saying is they don't want to get involved in direct violence because they know that they would lose, and they're cowards in that respect, certainly. But what you learn if you really study how the occult world operates is it operates through mind control and mental manipulation. Okay, tons and tons of different mental forms of manipulation, obfuscation, creating chaos to justify what you're going to do next. There's a million different methods that they use. Religion, certainly a big one. Okay, poisoning the environment, poisoning food and water, etc. Okay, to degrade people's ability to think things through. The media is a big one, constantly hammering people with untruth. And this is all parts of occultism. It's all parts of the dark occult, because the dark occult world just wants people to be ignorant. It just wants them to not be able to perceive reality and truth accurately. Okay. If we are perceiving it accurately, that means we have a higher consciousness. If we don't perceive it accurately, we have a lower consciousness. Consciousness is just the ability to perceive what is really taking place in the world around you and within you, inside your own personality, inside your own psyche. Okay. If we're very adept at that, people aren't going to slip things by us. We're going to see them for what they are. If we don't become adept at that through studying ourselves, through studying consciousness, through studying the laws of the occult, we're going to be able to be manipulated like taking candy from a baby, proverbially. Okay. And so that's the goal of studying the world of the occult, the teachings of the occult, the laws of the occult. They are hidden from people for a reason. They don't want people to learn and grow about how reality actually operates. So they're holding that information as tightly to their chest as possible, while using the knowledge of how the psyche really works and how the laws of nature works against people. They're holding that back, dissuading people from looking into it. So, oh, no, don't look at that. That's all evil. That's all bad. Religion tells you that you don't look at that. You don't need to be concerned with that. But then they know it all. So that's like saying, don't ever look at mathematics. Don't ever look at arithmetic. You don't want to learn how to add or subtract. Keep away from that division and multiplication. I mean, that's bad stuff, right? So then when you go to their store, they're like, you're like, how much is this pack of gum? And they're like, well, that's going to cost you about $25,000. So they'll fork over whatever you tell them, because they don't even know arithmetic, or they don't know what something's worth. Or you say that's $5, they give them $5, you give them a penny back for change, and they're like, is this right? And you're like, absolutely, that's right, because they don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. So that's what the occult world is doing. It's that simple. It's keeping people from the basic building blocks of understanding, of learning, of knowledge, about how our world is actually put together, how it works, how we work, most of all, how the individual and the psyche works and operates, how it can be manipulated and changed for the better or the worse through information. And that is why if people do not learn occult information, they are not going to come to the heart of the matter, which is natural law, which is all about conscience and the knowledge of the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior. And if we don't understand that covert slavery is wrong behavior, because we haven't studied the body of occultism that deals with morality, okay, the actual body of hidden knowledge that says there are natural laws that deal with consequences of behavior that we put out into the world individually and in the aggregate, we're not going to understand the difference between right and wrong. And that's what they want. The dark occultists who are running our society want total confusion in people's minds of the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior. That actual difference is objective and is not subjective. It is not up to us to decide. We look at the behavior, we say, does this behavior initiate harm or violence against another sentient being? If it does, don't conduct that behavior. It's a moral wrong. If it doesn't, then we reserve it as a right. And nobody has the right to say we can't do it by claiming authority over us and then ruling our behavior as our rulers, our masters. And that is what the position philosophically of true anarchy is. It's saying only do that which is right, don't conduct that which is wrong. No one else has the right to act as your master over your behavior. They have a right to defend themselves if what you're doing is wrong, and they have a right to defend others, but no one has the right to rule over you as your claimed owner or master. And this is borne out in the definition and the etymology of the word. Anarchy comes from Greek. The prefix an means without or absent, not present. And the noun archos, archon in Greek means ruler or master, in the connotation of a ruler over subjects such as a king, or a master over slaves, a slave master. Okay. The word archon meant that, an authority figure that is claiming rulership and mastery over another. And then you put that together with the absence of archos, an archon, anarchy, right? It means the absence of a ruler. No ruler, no master, the absence of rulership in a society. Well, what is rulership? Ancient rulership or kingship was the claim of authority over other people as one's subjects. The king or queen was the sovereign, the one that there is no ruler over. Sovereign means not a slave. Super regnum in Latin, above rulership. So the sovereign is the one that's above rulership. Rulership is for all the people down here. The sovereign's above that. That's the master. Okay, that's the king or queen. Everybody under her is him or her is their subjects or slaves. It's an interchangeable word. Kingship is interchangeable with authority. Subject is interchangeable with slave. It's the same conceptual idea. So all that happened in the modern world is rulership was being challenged, right? Kingship and queenship was challenged by the people and saying, what gives you the right to be the king or queen over us, to be the ruler over us and rule all of us as your subjects or slaves? And the answer always came back, our genetics, our bloodline, and God gave us the right, quote unquote, God, right? God doesn't give anybody the right to rule over others. God created an anarchic system where no one has the right to rule over others because we are all the sovereigns. We are all imbued with no authority over us. Okay. The only authority that truly exists over all of humanity and all of the universe is natural law. And so you see the dark occultists want to usurp the place of law, and they want to be the lawgivers when there is only one lawgiver, and that is the force, the consciousness, the collective universal being that is all, that created the universe of matter and the universe of law. Law and what it governs, meaning all matter and all beings in it. Now, you can call that God. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. You can call that a higher force. You can call that a higher power. You can call that universal law, universal consciousness. I don't really care what name you give it. It's something that human beings in our form will not be able to directly perceive and understand, but we can understand how the consequences of the laws that it put into effect work, and therefore recognize the existence and operation of those laws, and therefore recognize the existence of some power that put those laws into effect at the time of the creation of the universe, or just steady state universe, if you believe that. It's always been that way because that is how the universe was generally constructed. It was made that way. It operates according to laws. It's not chaotic. Okay, it's not random. Planets don't go in random orbits. They have laws that govern orbits. Solar systems have laws that govern them. Planets have laws that govern them. Weather systems have laws that govern them. Matter, all the way down to the subatomic level, has laws that govern them. Human behavior has laws that govern it. It's not exempt from law just because people don't want some force being higher than themselves. So there is a higher power, but it's not the power in the same sense of authority as making a claim over another being. See, that's a personal force at work. That's somebody's will directly saying, yes, I'm going to do this to you because I want to have power and I want to have rulership and ownership over other beings. This force that governs all of creation is impersonal. It's an impersonal force, and it just sets the law into effect because that is what maximizes the possibility for preferred outcome, right? It wants more complexity. It's a complexity conserving engine. It's a justice conserving engine. So we're always really getting justice. We're always really getting what we deserve, even if we can't perceive that. The universe isn't broken. Universal laws are not broken. People are broken. Humanity is broken and needs to be fixed. And yes, is broken and does need to be fixed. People want to say, oh, nothing's broken. People aren't broken. They don't need to be fixed. Yes, they do. Their thought processes are broken. Their understanding is broken. Their morality is broken. Their will is broken. Their perception is broken, largely. Most people. Not all people. Some have healed themselves. And that's the goal. That's what we need to do. Okay? But there is a preferred outcome that these impersonal laws are working toward. And if we buck them and try to go against them, and that's what the dark occultists have done, they've said, we don't care about these laws. We want to be the lawgiver. We want to be God. We want to be the one who says how it works. And then that becomes reality here in our little pocket, our little isolated prison that we've made called the earth. Okay? That's psychopathic. That is totally chaotic and can only lead to more forms of chaos and destruction and death. That's why the reins of power must be taken away from these people's hands and not given to anybody. There should be no reins of power. There should be no throne to sit upon. We have to destroy the concept of authority as being morally legitimate. It is not morally legitimate anywhere in the universe. We are pariah of the universe as beings. Other beings aren't going to swoop in here and rescue us from the mess we've made for ourselves here on Earth. People expecting that to happen are delusional. They're looking at us and going, good God, keep that virus isolated over there so it doesn't infect anywhere else in the universe. They look at us with pity and contempt, not admiration and like, woe is them. Oh, let's go help the poor little humans, And anybody expecting that, they're stuck in religious virus forms of thought. The New Age movement is a very dangerous thing that comes out of dark occultism that is teaching people, oh, just observe or wait for the aliens that, or spiritual beings that are going to descend out of the fifth dimension and save us. No scenario like that's coming. It's up to us to learn how natural law operates, and it's up to us to save ourselves. And do we need saving? Yes, we do, but not in the religious sense of needing saving. We need saving from tyranny and slavery. That's what we have to save ourselves from. Nobody's going to save us from the tyranny and slavery that human beings made and human beings allow to persist. No one's coming in here and going, gee, what a brilliant idea, guys. You made these systems. You made these institutions. They ultimately enslaved you all. You created that for yourself. And while you're in it, you still condone it because you're of such a low level of consciousness in vibration and in understanding that you can't even see the slavery that you're in. What being's going to come down and say, oh, yeah, I want to take responsibility for that level of unconsciousness? Then they're holding the bag, right? Yeah, that's what we want to do, right? Don't we want to go and just rescue every form of lower life that's extant in the universe and take responsibility for it and just save it all? No, we're looking for our development, just like other beings want to be left alone and pursue their own development. That's why personally I look at an extension of anarchy and natural laws. Leave the animals alone. The animals want to be left alone to their own devices and live their own lives. They're not that their lives aren't my own. I leave them alone. The first principle of natural law is leave other life alone. Live your life. You learn and grow. Now, that doesn't mean don't influence people. That's the great work. I mean, don't try to control it by leave it alone. Don't get involved in trying to tell it what it can do and control it, right? This is the human fall out of higher consciousness, okay, and it being stuck in base level consciousness. Most people just don't know how to leave other people alone, and most people don't advocate to leave other people alone. It's very easy. All you got to do is say no violent or coercive behavior should be done to those people so long as they're not doing violent and coercive behavior to others. And here is the problem. Everybody is afraid that someone will do violent and coercive behavior. So we put coercion into effect to prevent people from doing violent and coercive behavior instead of just dealing with violent and coercive behavior. And if we were doing that, we wouldn't have the kind of crime we have. We wouldn't have government, because that in of itself is violent and coercive behavior, right? Which any moral being will say we shouldn't have. I'm against all forms of violence and coercion. I won't even kill a bug. I will capture a bug and take it outside my home. I will not interfere with that life because it's on its own trajectory. It's on its own path in consciousness. That's not mine. I don't own that. I don't want to control that. I don't want to destroy that. I don't have the right to, right? It's very easy to leave things alone. It's very easy to leave other people alone, but people can't seem to learn that. And that's really the first principle. You got to sit down with yourself and ask yourself, shadow work is a big part of the occult. People don't have internal dialogues and discussions with themselves in silence. You got to ask yourself, what do I want control over this for? Control always comes out of fear. If you want to control other people, it's fear that's leading you to control. That's why people want laws. That's why people want government. They want to feel safe. They want to feel like they're cared for. They want to feel like they're going to be in some cocoon or in some nest or something safe. And there's no such thing. There is no such thing as safe, as permanent, enduring safety in the 3D physical world. We are physical creatures living in a physical domain. There are dangers associated with that naturally. We have to accept that. We have to purge that fear from our consciousness, because one of the things that is taught in the occult, and I reiterate all the time in my work, is slavery comes from a particular kind of fear. It comes from primal fears, okay? And the biggest primal fear of all is the fear of death. The fear of what people perceive might be the cessation of consciousness, which I do not feel or believe that it is. I feel that consciousness continues in a multifaceted variety of forms, in a multifaceted variety of places and times, and continues on and on and on. People have that existential fear of death as the end of consciousness. And that's the true beginning of all forms of slavery. All forms of control are built upon the illusion of wanting to be safe. All forms of control and slavery are ultimately built upon the ultimate primal fear, the fear of death. So an occult principle that is taught is the very beginning of the enslavement process is the fear of death. If you continuously fear death and you live in existential doubt of survival of consciousness beyond the physical, then you are going to be more apt to let control come into your heart. You're going to be more apt to condone control of both yourself and others. And I word it in the phrase, the fear of death is the beginning of slavery, very simply. That's something that individuals have to work upon. You are not going to be physically safe forever in the 3D. Eventually you will age. Eventually you will grow sick. Eventually you will die. We all will. No one lives forever. Nothing lives forever. It's a continuous cycle of consciousness. And people have to become okay with that. Not just intellectually okay. They need to become okay with it in the core of their being. And that's what occult practices help with. True meditative practices, true practices of introspection and shadow work. They have deep internal value, and they can purge these kind of primal fears. Largely, not saying you ever really get rid of it fully. There's always something in the back of your mind. Hey, I'm going to die one day, right? It doesn't mean you let that direct your life. You don't live your life in fear. You live your life to try to better yourself and try to help others around you to better themselves. And that's what the occult also teaches. It teaches you can't control people, but you do have influence in this world through your words, through your actions, most of all. We can influence others to not be as afraid, to help them to grow courage internally and grow the courage to act in the world at large, externally, so to speak. Okay. So we have the ability and the power to influence others if we step into that role, right? If we grow courage within ourselves and then we step into that role of right action through influence, through words and behaviors. There's nothing wrong with that type of influence. When the influence is based upon something that is untrue, it's untrue, and you try to propagate the untruth, that's called deception. That is not a right. That is one of the transgressions against natural law. And that is what the controllers of our world, the social engineers, are always doing. They're always deceiving people so that they come out on top. And again, to go back to the karmic idea of them trying to shield themselves from the consequence karmically that comes down upon them, they don't really bloody their hands. They get their order followers to bloody their hands. They tell other people, you should be doing this to people. We'll enlist you. We'll pay you these worthless slips of paper called money, that is all also invented and made up. And you do the dirty work that bloodies your hands and actually gives you the real karmic consequence, the real, moral culpability, because you perform the behavior with your own body. How many lawmakers perform the violence that their laws command with their own bodies? You think members of Congress go out into the world and when they say, oh, you didn't get a permit for that child's lemonade stand, do you think they go out there with a sledgehammer and bust down the lemonade stand? And if the parent and or the child resists, beat them and drag them into a cage? No. The lawmakers never, ever dirty their hands like that. They just write down a bunch of nonsense on paper and then call it law, put it in a legal book. Then the order followers, the police, go and actually do the karmic behavior, the actual physical world, real 3D behavior with their body violently to another being or group of beings, and therefore they're taking on the karmic debt. And the lawmakers and the social engineers are laughing at these people hilariously. They're just laughing at them like big, full belly laughs.
Chessboard.
Yeah. Worse than that, they literally, in the world of the dark occult, call them their animals. They call them their dogs, their pets, their animals on a leash. Literally refer to them like that in the
People
open.
referred to slaves like that too back then. They
That's
couldn't read or write either, so they
Weren't
couldn't
permitted
understand
to.
anything.
That's right. Weren't permitted to learn those learning tools. Forget it. That would have been forbidden. I showed someone recently an interview that I showed as part of my, again, this directly relates to Aaron's original question about why should people learn about the occult and how is that directed to human freedom and directly related with understanding the immorality of slavery. These people are very open about their rulership of our society. It's not as covert because I was explaining to this person who I showed this video to, which I'll tell you about in a moment, just as a little side anecdote here. There's a little war. There's a little war of contention. I wouldn't say it's going to erupt into a big hot war in the dark occult community, but there is a very distinct differentiation of opinion regarding the direction that their form of rulership should continue to go. And it breaks down like this. There's a large group that wants covert slavery to continue. I'd say it's probably about 70 to 75% of the dark occultists of the world are okay with the continuation of covert slavery through mind control, mental manipulation, false media, putting out deception and disinformation. They're okay with it progressing like that. 25 to 30%, I would say, are this new breed of dark occultists that take the approach that we want to externalize our power. We want to come out into the open and we want to tell people we are your owners, we are your rulers, we are your masters, you are our slaves, you are our subjects. If you do not obey what we tell you you must or must not do, we will send our henchmen to kill you. They want the world to be structured in a totalitarian prison society like that. They don't want to do it through manipulation and even pharmaceutical means, etc., drugs,
Technology?
and technology. They don't want to do it like that. They want the hard hand. They want to take the velvet glove off and present the iron fist. And they want to pound on humanity with the iron fist into total submission or even extinction if necessary. That's how psychopathic this about 1/4 of the dark occult have become. And a Hollywood television show was made about this. It was called True Blood, where it's about vampires. And one vampire group section, or a faction, I should say, wants to continue to feed off of human beings in the shadows. And this is just allegorical for the war that's going on in the occult world. Then there's another group that says, no, we should come out in the open and we should present ourselves and we should tell human beings, you are our food and we are going to feed upon you openly. What are you going to do about it? Okay. And they still want to make it like a cooperative thing where they get people at first to volunteer, but they really don't intend to stay that way. They intend to just, actually go after people as a food source eventually. And there's this discontention among the two factions, and that's what the whole TV show is ultimately eventually about. This is happening in the real occult world. This is the dynamic known as the externalization of the hierarchy. And what the hierarchy is the hierarchy of slavery. It's the hierarchy of rulership over other people through them being the masters. Then they have their order following class, the police and military, or actually above that, they have the lawmaking class, the politicians, then the police and military. Then you have, the corporations and the people, etc. And that is, how it has worked through covert hierarchy. They want to bring that hierarchy of power out into the open publicly and just tell people this is neo-feudalism. This is just a new form of feudalism. We're the authority. We're the king. You're our serfs. You're our subjects. You own nothing. You'll do what we say, or there will be violent consequences enacted upon you by our order followers. And that's what it really is now, except most people don't know it because it hasn't been publicly announced that it is that way. But guess what? It actually has, because there are actual real world occultists that are coming out in the open and saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what we want to do. We're already in power and we're going to do it. And the interview that I presented in my presentation on dark occultism called Demystifying the Occult Part 2, Satanism and the Dark Occult, I played an interview from the year 1988 or 89 with a Satanist who was married to the then high priest of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's daughter, Zena LaVey. His name is Nicholas Schreck. He was on a racist, like sort of white power type, neo-Nazi type, neo-fascist type, cable access TV show with a guest named Tom Metzger. And Metzger, the host, Metzger was interviewing Schreck, and he was asking him, well, you're a Satanist, and you believe in all of these tenets of Satanism. He said, what would the world look like if you were in power? And Schreck looked at him like, oh, you don't really understand, do you? He said, we are in power. We already are in power in the world. He said, we are waging a guerrilla war against the human mind through every form of media that we already control. And he said, our goal isn't to be in power. It's to tighten our reins of power such that it makes what Hitler was doing in the 1930s and 40s look like a picnic. He literally says that in the interview, out in the open. And you can bet he got in some trouble with those above him in the hierarchy of Satanism, because at that point, they certainly didn't want loose cannons like that going out there and saying that out in the open to the average cattle. Okay. They want people to believe in the legitimacy of their own rulership, called being a subject of government. Okay. They do not want people perceiving it as it actually is, a system of slavery based on violence and duress, by which the masters are telling you must comply or violence and death will be conducted upon you. That's the actual point of fact reality of the situation. But at that point, they certainly did not want people perceiving it that way. They wanted to continue their overt form of mental manipulation. Now, what Schreck did is now becoming more popular with people like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, and others. They're still somewhat covert, but they are pushing more toward this full overt depopulation agenda, making sure people comply, or they know violence will come, or they know they will be ostracized from society by how it's structured. There was an interview recently done by the eugenics think tank operation known as the Club of Rome. It's a dark occult organization, although more on the front lines as an interface between people and the occult world. I was continually referred for the Club of Rome when I was in Satanism. When I was a Satanist and involved with satanic grottos in my area, higher level occultists in that those grottos always said to me, if you go further, if you really take this mantle up and go and pursue it truly, you're going to be perfect for the Club of Rome. I heard it from at least 6 or 7 people. Okay. And they knew what my intellect and my communication skills were like. And they also knew what my mindset back then was like, as far as how psychopathic I was and how much I wanted depopulation and eugenics. It was one of the big things I talked about as a Satanist. That was my little, speciality within the world of the dark occult. And that's why whenever I talked about it, they heard my passion for it back then in my screwed up mindset. And they said, if you go further in this, we can almost guarantee you're going to work with the Club of Rome. And recently, this year, a representative of the Club of Rome, who I'm not positive, but I believe he's like on their steering committee slash board of directors possibly, but I'm not sure about that. Don't hold me to that. But he's certainly a spokesperson for them, at least. He said there is an ongoing worldwide depopulation agenda taking place and active right now. And it is my hope that that agenda proceeds in a civil fashion and doesn't erupt into violence and war, meaning against them.
Wow.
He said that out in the open in an interview, in a video interview. And all you have to do is type Club of Rome, depopulation, civil. The word civil, CIVIL, because he states in it he wants it to proceed in a civil fashion. Then you'll get his name and you can watch the whole interview. This is the mindset of the dark occult. Clearly, they believe that they are owners over other people. Clearly, they believe they have the right to direct not only their characteristics eugenically, but they have the right to end the characteristics and even the people that they see as undesirable or unfit to continue in their world. There is no better definition of slavery. That is exactly what slavery is. You claim ownership over other beings. You claim what other beings may express. You claim what they may own. And you even claim whether they can reproduce, what characteristics they may reproduce, and whether they may even continue to live and propagate their bloodline.
Their God.
Imagine that. Their God in that sense. Yeah.
But it's false. It's unnatural. It's immoral. I mean, this is why we have this phrase, I guess, liberty or death, right? I mean, like you said, if we fear death, this is the number one thing toward our enslavement. Well, what's the opposite of slavery? It's freedom.
That's right. Freedom is life. Slavery is death. Slavery is worse than death. There are things that are worse than death, and slavery and tyranny is one of them, because that means the greatest gift of all creation that has been endowed upon us, that we are endowed with as natural beings in this universe, is free will to self-direct our development, our evolutionary progress in consciousness on this planet, and who knows where other realms we may go to if we do truly evolve out of this lower dense vibratory level of consciousness and into a higher one that has deep understanding of natural law and universal law and how karma really works and what morality really is. That's my hope. I want to see where humanity can truly go. I see a lot of potential in our species, as bad as it is. And I constantly reiterate and remind people how bad people have become. That is not eternal. That is not set in stone. That's a choice. That's a choice through remaining ignorant. We have a choice. Yes.
Would you say they'll learn one way or another?
Absolutely. Because the universe is going to give us this lesson the hard way, or let us self-direct our progress in consciousness, which we are in charge of as of right now. But at some point, when we become so imbalancing to other natural systems around us, and I'm not necessarily even saying it's just the earth, that those natural systems certainly extend beyond the earth. When we get destructive to the local neighborhood, then higher forces do intervene and say, whoa, 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 whoa. That can go down in your local neck of the woods, but it ain't going down here, boys and girls. And then it says, well, we do have to shut this down a little bit, maybe not to the point of extinction, but maybe to the point of near extinction.
Stagnation.
Right. And say, we're going to set this little petri dish back about 250,000 years. and then let's see if we can get it right on the next round,
Or
forward.
de-evolving, essentially.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, we look at
Right
the
now,
ancients and what they
unfortunately.
taught, right?
That's
All this
right.
occult knowledge goes back many years. Would you say a lot of this occult knowledge kind of stems back, or is Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and the deists of the 18th century, would you say they're kind of related and connected to this idea of natural law? Because
Oh,
usually
sure.
when you look it up and you kind of get a basic understanding of
Yes.
it, it goes back to teleology.
Of course, without a doubt, they are the modern, people who are keeping those ideas flowing and going in the relatively modern world. I like to look at people like ourselves as the new modern age digital philosophers who are helping this to continue beyond our time,
Right.
and really evolve it as well and bring people into a deeper understanding of it, because there's so much media that we can create and give to people for study regarding this. I would say that those philosophers you mentioned hundreds of years ago, or even a couple hundred, are the ones who picked up the mantle from the more ancient occultists that went back into obviously Egyptian times, and then even antediluvian time, or pre-diluvian times, and it was very much more evolved then. And clearly, there was a cataclysm that probably occurred around 10,500 BC, or maybe a little bit longer ago than that. And it devastated a lot of this planet and set us back in our development. And then we've been rebuilding kind of ever since. And these ideas have been re-evolving ever since. But unfortunately, authority and government have a deep head start on us in their rebuilding project. And they have really done a number on the people of our world, unfortunately. We're playing catch up, but it is not something that can't be changed. This is not the default human nature. I hear a lot of people use human nature in the wrong sense. The only nature that we have is that we are programmable through information. And a lot of people would be horrified by that statement and be like, oh, how could you simplify and reduce human nature to that? Because it's true. Do we come into the world evil beings ready to slay everybody in front of us? Or do we come into the world angelic beings, in higher consciousness, ready to enlighten everybody? No, we need information before we behave anyway. And that's the formative years. The format's being laid in the body, computer, and the mind of information. That's the file system being laid. Then we install software, and programs, and then we perform tasks and we process. And what comes out through behavior is what we get in the world. It's very simple. We're not a computer, but we behave somewhat like the computer, and our nature is like a computer. A computer's nature is to take in information and then compute and transform information and output information. Our nature is we take in information, we develop either an accurate understanding of reality and behavior, and then we use our logical processes to do that, and then that informs our physical behavior in the world, and then in the aggregate we get the outcome, which is either orderly or chaotic. It's either good or bad.
Right.
Very simple. Good code in produces good output on the screen or on the disk or on the internet. Good information about morality into a human being creates good behavior and good output in the world. And then we get the good consequence, which is living in order and peace and justice together. And that's what we say we want, right? We say we want that, but then our behavior doesn't always align to it. Right, because there are requirements and knowledge for that a lot of people don't want to fulfill the requirements by truly learning how to think and learning what morality is. And that's what we're here to help influence them to do. That's our job. That's what I call the one great work, is an effort of edification and true education.
Which is not imposing our will and saying, oh, this is how we think everything should be done by gunpoint.
Right.
We're not forcing anybody to learn this knowledge. If anything, we're helping people realize that, wait, you shouldn't have other people decide what your life is to be, or what your rights are. And you say that rights are a form of property. Well, if they're claiming ownership over your rights, they're claiming ownership over you. Equally so.
Exactly.
I talk about objective morality. I just replace the word objective with natural, and morality with authority. I call it natural authority. I say that's the way people should look at it, because sometimes people get a little confused about the whole objective morality thing. But I say, well, look at moral relativism. See what it's done to our population over all these years. Of people just thinking, oh, I don't know what it is, or, oh, it's tolerance, or it's this, but they can't get definitive as to what is right or wrong. You know, the school system is built around, oh, is this tolerable? Oh, is this inappropriate? But they never get clear on what is right and wrong. The trivium is not taught in schools either. And people really have no clue. Their nature is confused. So it is based in truth. You know, I can't breathe for you. You can't breathe for me. So it's incorrect if I claim to breathe for you. And so it would equally be immoral, you know, so.
One of the big questions, status, people who believe in authority and advocate for authority in government always give to people who say, I don't want a state, I don't want a government. I want to live in voluntary cooperation and peace together, and I want to speak out against violence, duress, and coercion, and not have that be the operating principles that our society is operating according to. They say, well, how would this work? And they have this institution or this technology or whatever, you know, how would that work in a voluntary society without duress and coercion and violence, you know? And they don't really hear themselves. They're like saying, listen, if you have to be ruled as a slave and have violence done to you to have a road, would you not want to live without the road? If I can't ever again have a cup of coffee, right? And you would say the trade-in for that is you're actually free and you're not enslaved. I would go, well, no, look, I need to be enslaved to have a cup of coffee. Okay. They need to record themselves. I say record your voice and then play it back to yourself and hear how literally brain dead it sounds when you listen to what you're really saying. And what I answer is, I don't definitively know how, quote, that would work in a truly free voluntary society. Because guess what? There would probably be hundreds of thousands of methods invented as to how that would work. And then people could organize to say, I'm going to choose this. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to do nothing and not have that. That would also be a freedom of choice option. I want people to be free to choose how they would have something work, not to have one method imposed upon them through violence and authority. And it doesn't mean, a lot of people think, oh, a free society would mean technology would have to go away because look at how bad this evil technology is being used. Wrong. Cities would not have to go away. People would probably not choose as much to live in tightly condensed cities. They would spread out because of technological solutions that would be invented and would do things much more efficiently even than cities. And you can go and live in the countryside and still have all the amenities of life and be spread out a little bit more and have more room. You know, it doesn't mean we don't have technology. It means we're going to invent technology that is employed in different, smarter ways.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. It's a double-edged sword. It can be used for bad. It can be used for great good. You know, I say there's only two methods of human improvement: philosophy and technology. And philosophy has to come first. That's the primary. There is a hierarchy and pecking order to what things improve human conditions. Philosophy is the very foundation. You have nothing without that. Then technology can help with physical 3D worldly things, tasks getting done, making life easier physically, right? And communication, you know, obviously it's much easier with technology. To communicate these ideas to the amount of people that we're communicating them to in the ancient world would be next to impossible with, you know, scrolls and you know,
Right.
ink. Forget it. You'd be there. You would not be able to do it. It wouldn't matter how many lifetimes you lived. It wouldn't be possible to reach as many people as we can with modern communications. So it's obviously able to be put to work for good instead of evil and control. We have to make that choice. See, this is the whole thing. The whole thing that it ultimately comes down to is there's great news. There's not just good news. There's great news. There's things to be actually not just feeling good about, to be excited about, right? Obviously, there's a lot of doom and gloom, and there's a lot of things to look at that are horrible, right? And I remind people of that. We can't lose sight of those things. We have to be objectively honest about how bad things are. But the great news is this is changeable because we have the ultimate opportunity. We have the ultimate forms of communication at our disposal if we only learn how to use them. If we take a little bit of the time of our lives to invest educationally in learning how to use the great tools that we have at our fingertips, and just start to use them wisely to teach morality and natural law, and that our society is structured as a form of slavery, and educate people to that, educate people to how morally wrong how things currently are, and that they can improve them if we stop believing in this system and giving it our power and complying with it, and teaching other, believing ourselves that it's morally legitimate and teaching other people that it's morally legitimate when it is not. This is the grand opportunity that is before us.
Hmm.
You know,
We found the
that
purpose.
opportunity has never existed before, as far as we know in human history. We never had access to this type of technology and this reach, the reach that we can have toward so many people in our world. And what are people largely doing with it? They're squandering the opportunity. They're squandering it because they want their little measly lives to live only for their selfish interests, and they won't look beyond themselves and say, I got to put some of my selfish interests aside at this point in human history because of how bad things are, and I got to learn how to reach out and teach people. I got to learn the technology to reach out and teach people. This is the advantage and the opportunity that we have at this point in human history, and we cannot let it go to waste.
Yeah, and it's amazing how you look at statism and every argument pretty much fails from the ground up because it's immoral from the ground up. It doesn't matter whether it's this political party or that government, whatever form it is, if it rests on this one simple basis that it is immoral or unnatural, everything that's going to come from it is going to be the same basis. And people believe that it's real and that this government is a physical thing. It's like, how do we identify this thing? It's amazing, but even in the anarchist crowd, right, we see there's people who don't talk about morality. They'll talk
That's
about
right.
the means of production all day long.
That's right.
They'll be talking about, socialism, communism, all these different forms of economic policies.
They're pointing externally, but they're never pointing the finger inwardly to the human heart and mind, and
That's
the
why I
thoughts
say
that we
abolitionist.
condone. Right. I love that whole idea. It's very philosophically powerful to word it and structure it as we are against all forms of slavery. We are abolitionists, voluntary voluntarists, yes, but moreover, we are against and want to see the destruction of all forms of slavery. That's a powerful philosophical groundwork to base things off of. And I want more people to see that and start talking about government as slavery, taxation as not just theft, but as slavery, because the confiscation of someone else's labor, which they performed with their body to get the fruits of those labors, is a claim of ownership against the body itself. Indirectly, yes, but it still is a claim of ownership of the body and therefore slavery.
Yeah, and
Even licensure.
I'm
Yeah.
not twisting the abolitionist words either. I mean, they
No,
said it themselves.
that's right.
They
Huh?
made appeals
Look,
to
look at
natural law.
Frederick Douglass' words when he came up to the North, escaped slavery in the southern colonies and came to the North. He basically was saying taxation is still taking the fruit of my labor from me, and what percentage of that constitutes not being slavery anymore. Those are basically Frederick Douglass's ideas. I've reiterated them. In the modern day, but that was Frederick Douglass asking the question: what percentage of my labor that you are allowed to confiscate legally makes it not slavery?
Yeah.
Is it no longer slavery when it's only 10%? You know, is it no longer slavery when it's only 5%? Well, if you're commanding that I must give you the fruit of my labor because you're saying you're going to do beneficent things with it in society, and that's ultimately a lie as well. We know that. But even if you were doing very benevolent things with it in society, what gives you the right to confiscate the fruit of someone else's labor non-voluntarily? That's coercion. That's duress, because you're saying if you don't give it over, you're going to do violent things like confiscate it by force or even do harm to the person who refuses to turn it over. That's duress. That's coercion, and overall that's slavery, because the fruit of one's labor was made with their body. And if you're claiming to be able to confiscate the fruit of one's labor, you're indirectly claiming ownership over the body.
Yeah.
Very clear philosophically. That's what we got to do, is get people down to those first principle arguments philosophically, right? People want to move beyond that to utilitarian things. I notice how powerful of an influence utilitarianism becomes in our society. Well, then how's this going to get done?
Right.
I don't really care if it ever gets done. What those people are is a person living next to the plantation and saying, well, if those black people aren't enslaved, how is that cotton in the field going to get picked? Another friend of mine, Justin, says, he jokes around. He goes, they were that averse to just some yard work, just a little bit of farm work, that they wanted to do. Actually, they're taking the chance to go into war to continue to enslave these people, right? Because they don't want to do some yard work.
Justification.
Yeah, I mean, imagine not wanting to do your own physical labor. And so you're saying we're going to get other people to physically do that labor for us and get other people to then condone it. Taxation's no different.
Lack
It's
of
just
responsibility.
it's a covert and slightly softer form of it that doesn't come with guns, whips, and shackles and chains, but it comes with, these are the things we want to get done that we don't want to do directly. We're going to make other people pay for them by confiscating a certain percentage of their labor, whether they voluntarily agree to give it or not. And we're going to do that through violent order followers called the police that are going to come with guns and cages for people. They're going to put them in a mobile cage, handcuff them, put them in a mobile cage, and take them to a stationary cage, with guns. So the people who condone that condone slavery, they condone coercion, they condone the removal of free will, they condone involuntary servitude, and they condone gun violence. And they're the kind of people that would be the first kind of person to tell you, I don't condone any of those things. They're religiously diseased. Government is not just a form of slavery. It is slavery. It is a religion. It's a sick, psychotic, diseased, false religion that only serves to hold humanity back in progress, in consciousness and development here on this planet. That is ultimately what it is. And the people who believe in it are religiously demented. I want to say that definitively, and I'll say it in person to anyone that has a problem with me saying it. The belief in authority and government is a demented, sick, violent religion. And if you believe in those things, you are demented, mentally ill, sick, you condone violence, and you condone slavery of human beings. That's not my opinion. That's actually what it is by definition.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to back that up as well. I mean, we're not baseless. We're not just saying these things. We have actual information that people should take the time and really reflect and think about what we're saying. Like you put out, how many years of content of work have you put out?
Too many.
and same with myself already by now. I've done an unnatural law presentation, and one of my slides is the law of slavery, the law in quotes of slavery. And it claims that slavery is proportional to order and that freedom is proportional to chaos, because that's what most people think about our world, is that freedom is chaos and that it should be feared, essentially, and that slavery is order, and that in order to have order, you have to have external control rather than internal
violence
control.
Right?
Yes.
It's exactly backwards. They have everything upside down and backwards. It's sad. It's not only angering and frustrating. It's very actually sad and depressing, because you realize, because of the programmability of human nature and how badly someone can become screwed up in the programmable state, you realize how far they can really take people into a demented form of thinking, and absolutely not only incorrect, not only immoral, but a deranged form of thinking, that they believe these things are justified and moral and necessary. And necessary is the worst thing, because this is the idea of necessary evil. I believe it was Eckhart Tolle who said, evil is only perceived as necessary to a person until they realize that evil isn't necessary. So there is no such thing as necessary evil. You never need to comply with evil. We should never be tolerant to evil. We should always be completely intolerant to evil.
Right.
Evil is the destruction of freedom.
Why would we call
Evil
it
is the destruction of human rights. Evil is violence. Evil is forced coercion. It is the removal of free will. It is the removal of consent. That's what authority implies by definition, is that you have no right to say no. That is what consent is. Consent is saying, I either want to voluntarily take part in this, or no, I want no part of that. Stay away from me with that. Don't force that on me. If you have a right not to be raped, if you have a right not to have sexual relations with someone that you don't want sexual relations with, then you have a right not to be coerced against your free will consent when it comes to rules being set for you if you're not harming anybody else. Now, again, if you are harming anybody else, you forfeit your right to remain unharmed. If someone's actively doing violence to someone, they forfeit their right to remain unharmed by others. That's the self-defense principle. You always maintain the right to defend yourself against coercion, duress, and violence. We have to keep that in mind. There's a right to act against people who are violating natural law and violating the non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is people have been dementedly deceived into believing these people have a right to commit such violence. These people have a right to coerce people. They have a right to place people under duress and do physical violence to them if they refuse to comply. And they don't see that as the removal of consent. They don't see that as the removal of free will. They don't see that as a claim over your free will, over your behavior, and thus over your body. How screwed up does someone's logic circuits have to become through deception and deceit and mind control and mental manipulation and social engineering to see those forms of violence and evil as not only justifiable, but as necessary? This is what I'm trying to say, how far gone mentally, psychologically, and spiritually most people in our society are. And that's why it's so important. If you do understand these moral principles, you have to teach them to others. And in order to get them out to a lot of people, you have to use modern communications through technology. That's what the internet is here for at this current time in our human history, not to play a bunch of stupid games or just, indulge our pleasures through physical means or watching sports and stuff like that. It's here to teach our fellow brothers and sisters of the human family. That is what this is, the most immense opportunity for growth and development in the human species that has ever presented itself, and we cannot let that go by the wayside. We cannot squander that opportunity.
Yeah, as the Liberator newspaper said back in the 1800s, our country is the world, our countrymen are all mankind. And I think the coincidences are just too coincidental. The link between, slavery and government and its history, going back to the very first, oldest form of government, Sumeria, at least we can hold account to. And so thank you for joining us and sharing all about this and really getting into the action, because that is the action, right? It's mainly education. It's just helping people wake up to who they are by their nature.
There's no greater form of right action than moral education of our fellow human beings. That is what the great work ultimately is to do. And it's up to us to do it. No one's swooping down in here and saving us from this situation. We have to use our willpower. We have to use our intelligence. And most of all, we have to use our care for truth and for justice and for freedom to go and do that work in the world. And gentlemen, I thank you guys for doing that work and being a part of that liberation effort as abolitionists to end human slavery on this planet. That is what the great work is all about. So thank you for having me as part of this great summit. And your questions were awesome and on point. Great interview. And I hope people learn a lot from it. If you want to visit more of my work, you can go to my website, whatonearthishappening.com. Cory and Aaron, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Good stuff. All righty. I actually want to show myself here. Just a moment. Look at this. Because Fabian Liberty rated us on Twitch. Thank you, Fabian. Thank you, everybody out there. Anybody from Twitch? Let me see you in the chat. Reclusive Solitude. I always see you on Twitch. Hey, man. And we got people on YouTube as well, because we're streaming on 2 platforms at once, which I think is pretty darn awesome. Particularly because I'm mostly a video creator and not a live streamer. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I don't stream on Twitch that often, but I will probably stream more in the future. Always. That's why I always consider it, why it's all set up. But yeah, it's been nice, and hopefully some of you guys on YouTube who've been sticking through the Mark Passio interview enjoyed that. We have more to come for the rest of the night, so don't worry, we're not done. We have a lot more from the summit. But for those of you who are just coming in, maybe you're just stopping by. I know, DK, you just stopped by on YouTube, and you guys from Twitch that are stopping by, I want to let you know that it's basically what we're doing. But wait, there's more. What we're doing is we're showing replays and many of the interviews from the summit. And in fact, I have 3 minutes until the next day arrives. So I have to send out emails to everybody. If you haven't signed up for the summit, then be sure to do so. It's endofslavery.org. You'll see there's a bunch of graphics and stuff. It's also in my Twitch description if you're on Twitch. And I would recommend you could just go there if you want. To find it, but there's so many great speakers and a lot of great resources. And basically, I did a premiere last night where I talked a little bit about how the summit works. There's also a welcome video as well on day 1. And thank you, DK, for restreaming me. He streams 24 hours a day on Twitch, all sorts of different things. But yeah, you guys are all awesome, and I just want to thank you for that and for sticking by. So, well, without further ado, let's continue. The next one's going to be a little bit, how do I put this? Maybe a little bit, not heart-touching. Well, heart-touching. I mean, it's nonetheless an example of everything we've been talking about on the summit so far. So if you're new here, well, this will probably sum up everything you need to know, well, within 5 minutes. So here we go. Let's continue this stream here. All right. Oh wow, it's just playing without. Okay, there we go. Here we go. Thank you guys.
message from the Portfolio Council. Please follow the government rules at this time. You must stay home.
Low-level offenders, jaywalkers. Cameras record them going through intersections, zero in on their face, and then publicly shame them on nearby video screens. It's all part of the Chinese government's new social credit system, where people's daily behavior is monitored and rated. But this social credit rating goes far beyond a traditional credit score, which is based on your finances. China's version factors in everything from jaywalking to smoking on trains to buying too many video games. If your score gets too low, you can be banned from buying plane tickets, renting a house, or getting a loan.
You can tell whether it is an adult, a child, a male or female.
Police in Beijing have been wearing these glasses that can recognize faces linked to the government's national database to help boost arrests. Do you trust the government the way they're using your technology?
Sorry, I can't answer this.
Anyone who tests positive has no choice. At night, between the high rises, a drone tells people to follow COVID rules and, bizarrely, not to sing on their balconies. Crowd shouts, "We're starving." While last week a man was filmed venting his fury on the phone. "What am I supposed to buy?" he shouts. "What do I eat? You're driving us to our deaths."
The paper is blank, but the eyes say it all, filled with rage.
If you look at the Chinese system now, they have this QR code. You can't do anything in China now. And China is the blueprint. I've been saying it for so long. And look what's happened since the COVID era. That China's moved to the West in terms of the way society is orchestrated and organized. If you haven't got the right ticks on your QR code, then there's more and more and more and more and more things that you cannot do. You cannot take part in mainstream society in China. In China, in the hazmat suits and police uniforms coming out in their stupid tanks, what are they doing? Who are they? They are of the very people, and from the very people they are enslaving. So you've got the hierarchy in China, and they're recruiting from the population, the target population, people to enforce the will of the tiny few upon the population. And so you look at the gathering slavery of the population around the world, in the West, etc. And it's being imposed by people in uniform who have children and grandchildren and families who are subject to the same fascism that they are imposing on the population.
All right, now we got the second interview. This one is great. If also you're also new here, come to the channel. This will talk about everything.
Hello and welcome. This is Cory. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with Alexander Raskovich from the platform Realization. Realization presents science, philosophy, and knowledge about yourself and your environment freely and with integrity. With this knowledge, we strive towards a wiser world in full harmony and prosperity. And, you know, I love his works. I found it. I was like, this is a gold mine. He's got very professionally edited videos that are really easy for anybody who is new or anybody who wants to really refine their current knowledge. His website is realization.com. That's real, R-E-A-L. I, as in I, E-Y-E, and then Zation, S-A-T-I-O-N. TION.com, and his channel is also Realization, spelled the same exact way, on basically most video platforms and different social platforms. You can look him up, and we're going to be really breaking down concepts. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'm glad to have met you as well, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Cory. It's an honor to be part of your great summit with its great endeavor, ending slavery, and there couldn't be a more essential theme.
It is. It's a daunting task, right? We were talking about slavery, and we really got to break down these concepts because, unfortunately, in today's world, a lot of people may not be able to define even simple concepts such as rights or freedom or property or slavery. So before we can define slavery a bit further, can we break down some of those precursors to build up to that, such as like property, for example?
Yeah, no, as you aptly mentioned, it would be judicious to start from a foundational point. I like to always start from that root, which is kind of related to a branch of philosophy that I promulgate in much of my work, which is epistemology. And this is from whence we shall move on towards the way out, so the way out of slavery. So, because if you want to know the way out, you need to know how and why you got in for starts. So let's start with what slavery actually is, the common associations people make upon encountering the rubric of slavery is one that usually entertains the ball and shackle precedent of slavery, the chattel slavery, if you will, that took place a few centuries ago. But we are still void of a definition because we are making an association with the precedent. But what makes the precedent actually slavery? If you want to understand slavery, you inexorably have to understand what property is. And now, what exactly is property? Physical property, just to start with that, is objective. It is not subjective. There are things that can be owned. There is such a thing as ownership. Like for instance, this here is my cup. I have acquired the glass cup and the substance that it contains rightfully, without stealing it and without harming anyone for it. I have acquired it with my own resources that I have acquired rightfully as well, without harming anyone for it. I obtained these resources with my own time and attention, which are my true currencies in life, if you will. I've spent a lot of time and I paid a lot of attention to acquire these resources. Thusly, I own them. I have given a part of my life in exchange for the possessions I now have to make it easier or more satisfying. I have done so by way of my own free will decision with my discretion, which is also my property, my free will, my freedom to make decisions, because choices bear consequences, and the consequences are subsequently and inevitably mine and mine alone to bear. If I choose to take in a substance then I am the bearer of the consequence. Because in this case, I am using another piece of property I own, which is my body. My physical body is a literal and figurative vehicle with which I experience the three-dimensional space-time reality with my five senses. And now I choose to make certain decisions that could possibly bear positive results. Like I could choose to make decisions that are vital for my life, for my health, I should say, by adopting certain styles of living that could contribute to my health. And, that's usually what most people would strive for. And there could also be decisions that could possibly bear negative results. And I will be taking a risk if I choose to engage those. It could be by like inhaling drugs like cocaine, or by drinking beverages that contain high volumes of alcohol. If I am taking the risk whilst being conscious of it as a grown-up adult, I am making that decision. My decision is my property. My body is my property. The resources I used in exchange for the beverage or drugs are also my property. Thusly, the substance I am taking in, that I'm taking in, is also my property. I am exercising free will with something that is also my property, my freedom. My freedom to make my own decisions and to experience life in its entirety. Without confines, boundaries, and limits, because those are not applicable when you're talking about real freedom. Now, this is where it goes into the realm of beyond the rights that you actually have. Now, when someone else, another person whom has the same rights to his or her own property, and comes along and demands that you conform your decisions to his or her liking, i.e., they are coercing you, they are forcing you to make a decision that you do not want to make, and this could be to force you to give them your money or some sort of physical item. And this we commonly know as we commonly describe this as stealing. Now, nobody has the right to steal, and every cerebral individual would not disagree with that. Nobody has the right to steal because you are taking something without permission. Now, permission is paramount. It is a requisite of peaceful cooperation, because when you want someone to make a certain decision, it is always theirs to make, because they bear the consequences, and consequences always transpire. Your volition is always your prerogative, because nobody else has any right to it but yourself. Now, when somebody else tries to force you to make a decision, when you resent to it, you do not want to make it, in other words. But they use aggression to make you do it, then they are attempting to take away your right to decide for yourself. They are trying to take away your property, your free will in this case. Now, let's name some instances, some examples. Now, coercion is one that we just mentioned, to the taking away of free will, which is theft. You cannot tell me what I have to put into my body, like a vaccine or some other relevant substance that I have a right to be dubious about. And I would like to endorse my video I made called "Are You on the Right Side?", which pertains to the vaccine situation and what I'm talking about now. But you cannot tell me what I should or what should or should not enter my body, because it is because first of all, it is my body, and there are also my consequences. If that consequence happens to be a risk, it is a risk I have to consent to. A risk without choice is not a risk, it is assault. In the same way that forcing someone to play Russian roulette is assault, despite the fact that you're forcing them to pull the trigger, it is assault. Which brings me to assault, which usually follows coercion. You are taking the well-being or health of that person's body, their property, that does not belong to you to take, which is theft. Again, and some more instances like rape. You are transgressing upon someone's right to their own free will to sexually associate with whomever they choose. You are taking free will again. Theft. And trespassing. You are another instance. You are taking away the security of another being in their own personal living space that they also own and have acquired rightfully. You are stealing someone's ability to live securely in their space, which they use and actively own, and you are doing so without consent. So we all acknowledge them as harmful deeds like rape, coercion, assault, trespass. Every cerebral individual would not disagree with that. Now, one should never conduct themselves in this way. And since we are talking about our rightful property that is being taken, that only ourselves as the owner have the right to, nobody else has the right to perform these deleterious behaviors. So, we are all equal, they say. We all have the same rights. If one person is not allowed to do this harmful action, which we all agree, we all have a rapport and mutual understanding. We have a broader understanding that we should not perform these behaviors. We all acknowledge them as being wrong. Now, we all, so at the basis, we all agree to that. Now, when we are talking about slavery, we are ultimately talking about duress. Slavery in its core can be encapsulated as the removal of choice and free will. The people with dark skin tones were not permitted to make decisions over their own property. All of the aspects of their property we just mentioned, their body, their free will, and ultimately their volition, the fruits of their own labor, which are tasks that they gave their time and physical and mental attention for in exchange. They gave a part of their life to perform those tasks. Thus, they were deemed to be owned by another person. Now, we know that this was wrong, as most people would not disagree. You go on the street, everybody knows slavery is wrong. But we only deem it wrong because the degree of which was so blatant and obvious. But in principle, slavery has never actually vanished. The degree has only been reduced to a less obvious predicament, if you will. And herein lies the key to understanding the very principle of slavery. In slavery, it doesn't require continuous physical violence to slaves being kept on a cotton field, on a plantation, for instance. They were forced around, and the slaves were not like forced around and whipped with a cat o' nine tails incessantly. What it does require is continuous duress. Duress is the state where beings are being kept in a continual threat of violence. People are being threatened with violence if they do not conform with the wishes of the master. So as long as they comply, no one is being harmed. So you are free to do as you're told. And in our situation, it appears as if people are free, but the dynamic is the same exact dynamic is taking place. You are free within the boundary conditions of authority as long as you don't start to question it. Now, authority over another being is slavery under duress. During the era when people with dark skin tones were held as slaves, it was readily observable that people were slaves. However, today, it isn't necessarily readily observable that violence will be done unto you unless you continue to conform to the wishes of authority figures. And as we just established what our rightful and rudimentary property is in life, this is not the natural state of reality as it is supposed to be. It isn't. We aren't supposed to live according to the whims of another being whom is not less or is not more isn't more valuable than ourselves, I should say, because we own our body, we own our free will, and we own the fruits of our own intrinsic and rightfully acquired physical mediums of exchange. And that is why people have always sensed that something was wrong about the system. There was always this something gnawing at them. Intuitively, people have always been struck by this sense of dissatisfaction. And this isn't because people are inherently grateful, as the system often promulgates, as we'll talk about later, but people have been convinced that there is no problem in it. And instead of following that which they sense, they continue to live their lives casually inside of the boundaries of the system that they are living within. And, as soon as those gates, you could call them, of what you are free and able to do within the system, creep in more and more and more. At one time, you're free to do this, and the next time it's a crime, which is what we've experienced over the last couple of years. there is less room for you to do as you please, because you have less room inside of this, the boundary conditions that are imposed onto you compared to the last time. And what that is when people essentially started seeing things clearly to an extent after these couple of years, and are being somewhat active in its mitigation, but not in its total abolition, which is why some people in the so-called truth and freedom communities have also become hesitant about these so-called endeavors of this very community, this so-called truth and freedom community. Many people have, really become confused somewhat, because in many of these endeavors are like bringing about new political parties, etc. You see, I compare the last couple of years of more coercion than people were used to, and with people saying that they just want to go back to quote unquote normal, I compare that to going from like 2 whips a day to 7 whips a day. And what many people want is to just go back to 2 whips a day instead of 7, because 7 is just too painful. But to say no whips is where we should point our attention at if we are to change the world condition. But many people, especially to a degree in the truth and the truth and freedom communities, are loath to accept that very fact. Which brings us to our contemporary present predicaments in the aggregate, the world condition now. Now, what I want to get to is why people are yet so amenable, why people acquiesce to this condition of not having proper ownership over what you actually own. And everybody who is honest with themselves knows that if you choose to show resentment or dissidence against the face of authority, like governments and etc., violence will be done unto you. They will trespass. They will introduce themselves. They will welcome themselves into your home. They will assault you, confine you, and ultimately murder you if the resentment shows itself to be uncontrollable, which also reveals itself to be a very appropriate term, actually. Violence, as in violation. They are violating your right to your own property. All things that we all have no right to do, as we all agreed upon earlier, because we all have the same rights. Yet some people magically possess the right to do the very things that are actually harmful deeds. Why? What makes these people so special? And in truth, nothing does. They aren't called authorities for no reason. Authority contains the word author, so the writer of a scribble. And they write down scribbles, they make things up. And there is no fixedness to them. They are wholeheartedly arbitrary and are dependent on nothing more than the individual whims and people who believe in them. They are not based on true morality, like we've discussed before, not transgressing upon people's right to their own freedom, the right to decide over their own body, their own choices, etc., living in harmony with one another. Yet the very essence of a government is nothing but the aforementioned violations. They do not come along and make voluntary suggestions for you to consider with your judgments, addressing your take on the situation, trying to give you your stance on the situation. They make demands, and one cannot choose to demur or refuse such a demand, lest incurring violent outcomes. And that's all they do. And vast amounts of people comply because they don't want to have any violence done unto them. And, of course, this is the mindset that one has to, quote unquote, that one has the quote unquote moral obligation to comply, unless you're a bad person or you're a criminal. And this is all that waylays the total abolition of slavery. And the reason why abolition has eluded humanity has to do with manipulation, obviously. And I'm not the first and the last to state this, obviously. But allow me to clarify what I mean by that, by, manipulation as the culprit, as the main culprit. Manipulation has to do with the psyche, as many would agree. So let's talk about our psychological elements, which the system seeks out, in order to make us more complacent in the face of blatant immorality. And if we just understand ourselves and know the purpose of our own psychological elements thoroughly, we might realize that the slavery also takes place somewhere else, which is in our mind. Now, people have become ensconced in this binary reductionist way of looking at the world, of there being this dichotomy, if you will, between something that is inherently good or inherently evil. Now, I beg to differ on that, because such is not the case. There is a purpose for our psychological elements to exist. Like, let's name a very prominent one, the ego. Understanding the ego has to do with its purpose. Ego has a purpose, an inherent, intrinsic purpose to our existence. The reason for ego to exist is it understands its own individuality and uniqueness from everyone else. Excuse me. And understands that one is not just part of a group or merely a cog in a machine. It helps to remind you of the fact that you are special. You're not just like everyone else. If it wasn't for the ego, then we wouldn't actually understand their own sovereignty and the fact that nobody can control you and reign over you according to their own individual whims, but that you govern yourself and you are your own leader. That's its purpose, to prevent us from limiting ourselves within the boundaries of collective thinking, of collectivism, thinking that the group is more important than the individual. It is protecting our uniqueness. The understanding and the acknowledgement of our uniqueness is from whence all our unthinkable capabilities, if you will, that's where they bear fruit. Beyond a fear of being disapproved by the rest, because many people eventually start to look for approval. Now, the ego helps to remind you that you don't need anyone else's approval. That is why culture and institutionalized ostensible religions condemn it. Because it doesn't want you to express your uniqueness so that you understand that you're not bound by limits, and you can achieve everything you wish to acquire, everything that you aspire to. They want you to conform. They want you to always look to the approval of the herd, so that a few people can more easily control the many, and so that you can become more predictable instead. Because they fear what you can become ultimately, because they know what you're capable of achieving. And if that expresses itself, their control system would absolutely perish. And, but once it's not, this is where we come into purpose, having a purpose or doing something it's not supposed to be doing, deviating from its purpose. Being used for a different end than it was intended for. But once it is not exercising its purpose, once the ego is run amok, it tries to find purpose only for its own self-preservation and for what it can gain for itself. This is what the ego is very prominent for, like the me mentality. But this isn't actually the purpose of ego. It's actually doing something it's not supposed to be doing. The ego should not be viewed within the binary reductionist confounds of being either inherently good or inherently bad. When we start to exceed, when we start to look beyond that limited view of the world, we see it for what it truly is. if it's fulfilling its purpose or if it's doing something it's not supposed to be doing. And then we start to look at things not in terms of preservation or eradication by its seeming malevolent or benevolent nature, but in terms of solving and redirecting or letting a puzzle remain unsolved. And if we are to redirect it to its true purpose, which is to help people recognize, like I like to break down words. And if we break down the word recognize, we see re as in a repetition, again, and cognize, cognition. To recognize, to cognize again that nobody can control you and reign over you according to their own individual whims, that you govern yourself. You are nobody's slave. You are nobody's property. You own yourself. And another one is pride. And pride also has its purpose. Culture teaches that pride is an unwarranted valuation of self. We've all heard this. But you are a being of unlimited value, so such an erroneous postulation is inherently infeasible. And this is the brink of it. Pride is condemned by culture because culture does not want people to understand how much they are worth. It purposely confounds the meanings of pride and conceit, and those are not to be used interchangeably, because conceit is believing that you are more valuable than others, and all people have infinite value, once again. So to be conceited is to degrade the value of those around you. And we have a very nice precedent of this: authority. Authority is the ultimate conceit. It lays people low lest they believe that it is they and not the law which has value. Like Jeremy Locke, the writer of The End of All Evil, lavishly put it. And pride is an understanding of your worth. Culture condemns it in order to suggest that you are really not of sufficient value to do, say, or accomplish things that you desire, like freedom and understanding your worth and the things that you want beyond the limitations of privileges within the system. And pride offends others because they have been taught by culture their entire lives that they have little or no value. They are vexed by the misunderstanding that prideful people are better than they are. And they are taught that pride is conceit, which is not, and nobody who's actually prideful actually thinks like that. I just understand, I recognize my own worth. I don't see myself as higher than anyone else. And if people were not so easily swayed by the doctrines of culture and religion, they would recognize that all people have equal and infinite value. When they see the pride of a person who has faith in themselves above that of their own, they would rejoice. If a prideful person has great value, then so do they. Culture condemns pride in order to make you amenable, like we just mentioned, and complacent with the demands of self-proclaimed authority figures. And your pride is righteous. It is justified because you are a sovereign. You are a sovereign being. You are not a slave. And, let's define sovereignty, because I think that's very pertinent to the current discussion as well. Like, sovereignty has an etymological root. And many researchers have actually addressed this, but I really want to emphasize the actual importance of it, because it really reveals the true definition of what it means to be sovereign. It comes from the Latin word super, which means above, usually something that is above something else. And reign, we see the word reign, which is derived from regnum. Regnum as in rulership and control. You stand above reign, sovereign, super reign. You stand above that which the things that desire control and power over you. And that's the true definition of sovereignty, and you are a sovereign. You see, that there is this theme going on that you can, quote, declare your sovereignty. And we've all heard about this, and that by way of doing certain rituals and vague procedures, you can become sovereign. which is a whole load of bunk, because you are a sovereign, and no person and no ritual can grant you that, because it is inherent to your very existence. You are a sovereign, period. Now, they want you to think of yourself as lower than their own system. This is why it's so this is where this notion comes from, actually. And of course, look, that doesn't mean that I wholeheartedly oppose this movement of, knowing your ways around the system and knowing what to say and actually to circumvent it. I'm just trying to explain that it is merely a means, but it is not the end. The end is the total abolition of slavery in its totality, and not just knowing the jargon that could help you circumvent its effects on your own life within the confines of authority. Well, it's actually omnipresent. And that's what pride and ego were built for. They help you remind yourself of the fact that that you don't need to go through all of that. I'm not less than some system and bound by it. I, as a free individual, am much more than the system. And no system can grant me permission to do anything. I don't need permission to be free. I don't need approval, because I govern myself. You don't own me. That's what pride is for, and that's what ego is for, and that's why they want to denigrate that. And and for something, Cory, I'm sure you've heard of this, and you're familiar with this. It's something that stands in the way of wanting freedom and abolition in the aggregate, collective freedom and freedom for everyone instead of for individual groups, not only for ourselves, but for everyone, for the entirety of life on Earth. And that is a characteristic that is also being denigrated by this system, and that is care, our sacred feminine, if you will. Our sacred feminine attributes of caring about our fellow in this sense. And in the same way, the ideology of social Darwinism, that's the ideology, the poison worldview that is promulgated by modern culture. It is with the intent to destroy your care for other individuals, because it denigrates such an inherent characteristic, care, as being a weakness. You're weak if you care about others. You have to. If you have to tread over other people, then so be it. If you have to tread over other people to get to where you want to, so be it. Because there are no rules in the world of in the Darwinian paradigm, the social Darwinian paradigm, if you will. And in fact, the world would go into the abyss if people don't care about each other and don't seek to live in harmony with each other, as it is doing now. And the idea that you have the right to tread over others to achieve your own goals is wicked. I already mentioned that an idea, one of my videos, I mentioned that an idea is akin to a virus. Now, consider the etymology of the word virus, which is the Latin word for poison. And that is the idea of social Darwinism. It is a poison in the mind that has caused tremendous amounts of suffering, the idea of social Darwinism alone. So to reconcile with these characteristics that make us who we are is paramount, because it has to do with the freeing of the mind, if you will. The freeing of the mind is what is paramount here. If the mind is free, the body will prevail, because we outnumber them by vast amounts, hence why they need to keep us anchored in this depriving state of self-contradiction, which in turn leads to self-loathing. And slavery isn't really a physical prison. It is it is to those who are aware of it, of course, but it is largely a mental prison in principle. The slave masters and their henchmen couldn't possibly enslave such a large number of people if the people didn't believe that they were rightful slaves and property of other people, that they had a moral obligation to obey someone else's decrees over their own life, that their own property was also someone else's property, and they could decide what you can do with it and take it away from you if you don't conform to their own will. There were these surely if people know the works of Frederick Douglass, there were these ideas during the epoch of slavery that postulated that you steal yourself from the master if you wanted to be free, and that you were too prideful and too arrogant and egotistic if you ever wanted to be free. If you ever wanted to steal yourself from the master, imagine that. The same way they manipulated people up here in the mind by destroying and disassociating people's connection with their true worth, what their true value actually is intrinsically, which in turn causes them to estimate their worth in cahoots with the estimation of this, the estimation the system gave you of your worth, which leads them to deem themselves with low self-esteem. And the only way to get out of that state is to gain self-respect. Now, self-respect, many people have heard of green language before, and I really like to apply that here, because self-respect really is the perfect example to apply the rules of green language, because self, refers to yourself, evidently. And respect, you can break down respect into two fractions. Re, as in again, as we just said with cognize, recognize, recognize. So in this case, we have re, again, and then we have spect. Well, what do we recognize spect in? Spectate, as in to look at something. It is also derived from spectare in Latin, which literally means to look at something, to view. So if we combine them all together based on the green language, we see self-respect, to look at yourself again, to view yourself in a very different light, to understand your true value in this sense. So that's actually, what pride and what ego were actually really designed for, and that's really what should be understood in this respect.
Wow, man, you covered so many great topics. It's just unbelievable. But it's like so many themes are coming to mind when you were talking about this, and we can tie it into so many other concepts that are crucial to understand, but you really simplified it for people. So something that came to mind when you were talking about ownership and property was responsibility, which I think is very similar to this whole notion of, well, you are in control of you, so you have to be responsible for something that you own, and sort of responsibility for the truth, and you sort of correlating morality with truth. Not just morality just based on somebody's whims or what somebody thinks to be right, but based on reality. The fact that I can only breathe for me, you can only breathe for you, I own me, you own you, for example. And Frederick Douglass, and like you said, a lot of them talked about this. It is no coincidence I've also documented abolitionists from that time period that understood slavery in the totality. Henry Clark Wright said slavery is, this involuntary subjection, basically, subjection to the will of another human being. And he would then apply that not just to the physical slavery that was happening at the time, but to the other forms of slavery that were also happening at the time. Lysander Spooner said after the Civil War there were political, social, economic slavery occurring. And so for these abolitionists to say that implies that there's more to just being ball and chain, physically enslaved on a field in a plantation because of your skin color. It's more than that. It's an act, it's a condition that can take hold of humanity and has taken hold of humanity over how many thousands of years across every culture, across every country, not limited to just one. So for you to mention this and to break it down, I think it's a historic moment, frankly. And for you to talk about boundaries, I think that is an important concept, because you can look at unhealthy boundaries and healthy boundaries. Of course, when we were looking at the context of boundaries, we were looking at we aren't restricted. As human beings, we have the potential, right? So we have the imagination to envision a better world in the future. But if we are in fear of freedom or in fear of that potential, then we will never reach it. So that imagination sort of gives way into our care to envision that new reality that we want to create. But if we have boundaries that are restricting our potential and our value, as you said, then we can never achieve that freedom or that goal, that purpose, as you mentioned, right? But then healthy boundaries, if we're looking at boundaries in another sense, would be, well, I own me, you own you. Again, so I would not breach upon you. I would not do something that would violate your rights. Hence, again, violence or theft or slavery. Golden rule is another thing you mentioned, right? How it's like, how would you like it if you were treated this way? You're treating someone this way. Well, how would you like it if you were taught, affected the same exact way as them? So the golden rule was taught across every single culture, every single tradition. But do we apply it? Do we understand how we apply it in our day-to-day life? So I thank you for connecting these topics together, because it's one that humanity has to understand, right? Is it hard to understand that people own themselves? I mean, I feel like people generally already have a sense of that, do they not? Or they have a sense of understanding the golden rule is true. So why do they make an exception to that? Why aren't they applying that in their life?
Well, I've actually talked about that in the past, and it has to do with the first thing you mentioned, which is responsibility. Many people, responsibility actually, it also has a very nice green language to it. If you break down the word responsibility, it would actually come to you as response ability, your ability to respond. And that is something, you responding for yourself, you using your voice, the power that the power of the voice to answer for yourself and to decide for yourself. This is being delegated in the form of voting and delegating rights to external authority figures. Because what does that do? It actually gives them a feeling of relief, being relieved of a burden, which is responsibility. The fact that you have to be a grown-up in the physical reality. And to mention responsibility goes actually hand in hand with voting, because in the Netherlands, where I live, the word for vote is stem, and stem, incidentally, in Dutch means vote. So to vote is to give away your voice, to give away your responsibility. So it is actually encoded in the very words we speak. Only those who are really conscious of it actually can translate them and actually see how either synchronistically or either intentionally, how we are actually being told, like, you're actually being fooled. And not only are you being fooled, you're choosing to be children instead of actual grown-ups by abdicating personal responsibility. And this would imply that people would have to take care of many of the things, like that they usually let other people do. But the excuse for actual, like, abolitionism, the reality that everybody owns themselves and that nobody can rule over other people by means of duress and coercion and violence, true freedom in that sense. Nobody, if people were to actually be in that situation, people actually antagonize, how could I say, people antagonize the idea of a reality without authority, without the borders that they are used to. And the things that they actually say are akin to, like, well, we need to have structure, we need to have some sort of means of how could I say, like, cooperation and all of that. Okay, I agree. We need to have structure and cooperation, but how do you go from that to violently dominating everybody,
right,
by taking a subset of people and giving them societal permission to rule the rest, and give them the right to use violence and coercion to get their to have people conform to their will?
It's the
How
only
would that
structure they know.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really the inculcation of an idea that is just, like that, like many abolitionists have said in the past, and the idea that with the void of pride and void of having that self valuation, people think of themselves as, this is all I am worth. I'm not worthy of being a truly free, and being this is the worth that has been given to me is that I'm a citizen. I'm a proud citizen of this country or that country, and I need to do as I'm told. That's like the only world that they've been given, because that's the very short-sighted view of themselves, the short-sighted estimation they have of their own value, which in turn causes them to actually not be able to actually, well, obviously there's a lot of people who get out of that eventually, but for the people who are there now, they are afraid of change. They're afraid of having changes in their own lives. The thing about comfort is the outcome is always predictable. Every day is predictable. People love they love it when things are, you can see the outcome. They love it when they see it coming.
Thomas Jefferson said peaceful slavery, right, rather than dangerous freedom.
Exactly. Well,
So,
you could actually many prisoners actually develop a dread of being freed after being imprisoned for like decades. So when they actually get freed, they do actually commit crimes with the very intent of being imprisoned again. And as we've just mentioned, even slaves develop a dread of being freed, because all their lives they have been taught not to follow their own conscience, not to follow their own discretion, but to defer to the discretion of some external authority figure. Hence, the inevitable outcome is that they will actually, well, what do I do now? I don't have any experience of actually exercising my individual discretion and judgment, and my competencies, actually developed competencies to be efficient in real world tasks that require real world responsibility. People have always been cared for by some external paternal figure, like a father figure, you could say, or mother figure, a substitute mother or substitute a surrogate father or surrogate mother.
I want the army to protect me. I want, I want the handouts. I want the this and that.
Then you have the two nodding dogs again, like the conservatives and the liberals. Like you're either what, and this is like the false. I discuss a lot of logical fallacies as well, and this is like the false dichotomy fallacy. Like I call it binary reductionism, actually, because it's really like if you're not one, you're the other. So you're talking. This is why all those weird, vague things come about. Like people like you and me being like right extremists. We're overly into the Republican paradigm. Like on the right side of the political spectrum. When you and I, we don't adopt any political system, but still, people view this false dichotomy of, oh, you're not, if you're not pro-government, then you must be, which is viewed within the confines of you being a left-winger, then you must be a right-winger, then you must be a Republican then, or you just must be on the right side of the political spectrum, but they don't view
boundaries.
Anything exactly. They don't view anything as something being anything beyond that. Beyond boundaries of political. Like you've either this or that. It doesn't have to be that way. There is so much more. But then people, like many people have described the left brain. The prison of the left brain, and I would like to mention that because the left brain is responsible for structure thinking and systems thinking. So without the companion, the balancing of the right brain hemisphere, which actually sees things more, how could I say, in a generalizing fashion. It is able to generalize. It is able to, see things for what they are. Instead of what structures and system and categories have been placed. And with people need to have some sort of system how everything works. It has to go according to some system or structure. But they are void of the creativity of the right brain hemisphere that could actually generalize things and have more of an attachment to, living in the moment, living in the present moment, and actually using your own intelligent judgments. And this actually tangentially goes hand in hand what I'm saying about the left and right brain hemisphere, because many people say intellectual judgment, but I say intelligent judgment, because intellect is an accoutrement of the left brain hemisphere. Intellect, real, logical thinking. And then you have the right brain hemisphere's generalization, and more more of a generating fashion, if you will.
Creative.
So when we combine, creative, and when we combine the two, we get intellect and gens, generalizing and creating, as you've said. And then we combine the two, we get intelligence. So we have intelligence in the sense that we are able to think logically. We are able to assert whether a situation is true or untrue. We are able to express discernment and have real. We are competent at filtering truth from falsehood in that sense, and then we are also able to generalize possibilities. We are able to think of possibilities that could be possibly true, but you simply being open to the to more possibilities than than within the confines of what authority wishes to impose upon you.
Yeah. So I think a good example for the audience and for anybody who's listening out there would be your own personal experience, because that is something you would know best for yourself, right? And again, all we would want, and I think, you and I are on the same page with this, we just want a world where we can get things done without slavery.
Exactly.
It doesn't sound to us like really hard of a demand, but because of the mental slavery, as you mentioned before, it's hard for people to see that it's occurring. And when people still do research on modern day slavery, you mentioned the jail system, that is an example of modern day slavery that some people are working to get rid of as well, because they see the jailing system as not actually helping people either. But it's a form of chattel slavery, and that's why they call it slavery. But they still don't look at the general picture or what really what slavery is, defining it, getting really clear like you did. So how about yourself when it came to understanding this greater understanding of slavery and statism is what we call it, right? Which is this belief in authority, the belief that somebody has the right to rule over you, that somebody has more special rights than everybody else, therefore making inequality. How did you get out of that belief system for yourself? And how long were you a statist, roughly?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I, as an estimation, I think, my process, I would like to, going into how long I was a statist. I mean, everyone who has gone through the established system throughout school and what have you not, and all the way to college and all the way to universities and what have you not, will always, end up being a statist one way or another. Well, it is actually the process of how long it took to go out of the status mentality, as you just mentioned, the idea that, this cognitive dissonance, actually, we all have the same rights, yet some people have more rights than you do, and these are special, and they actually have the right to do harm unto other people, and that it's legitimate in the sense that we should do harm and the very things that the very things that are actually create a peaceful coexistence, like freedom and all of that, or I should say the exact antithesis of that, like the very things that harm peaceful coexistence in society, like harm, trespass, stealing, that they can be good. And that's actually where it starts. It's actually a process of becoming honest with yourself, honest with what what you've thought to be true, like what you've been taught, and what you've you know espoused, and what things you've actually adopted as a paradigm, view as a world view. And that has to do really with being honest with yourself. The first step of was actually to be honest with myself. When you reach eventually a certain point in life where things that really are of insignificant value, like material things, like this hedonist lifestyle of becoming a famous scientist, or look at this. Did everyone see that I have a new car? No, like it says, you go beyond this frivolous, mundane, limited way of valuing things in life, and you actually start to value things that actually have value. Like this was my inception into the epistemological method, and also becoming an autodidact, actually asking questions for a start. What is this reality actually? What is my individual worth? What is what is the foundation of this very idea of statism? What is the foundation? Why is it legitimate? And this went back to when I was questioning like royalty, because here in the Netherlands we still have royalty, and that's like the first thing I encountered. Like, who gave you the right to actually govern me? As you look like a regular guy to me, so what gives you this special intrinsic right? Well, my ancestors had that right, and they also had the right to govern you. So I am their offspring. So therefore, I have the right to exactly. And then you see all these blatant logical fallacies present within this very system of authority in general. So then you go into government as well, like that piece of that little a scribble on a piece of parchment, actually really means anything by way of having gone through some various rituals and whatever. It seems very obviously that it is. It seems more like a religion to me, and eventually you go into seeing, if you actually just view things from up above and not view things within the limits of your own interpretation, when I was still programmed, if you want to call that. And if you just if you're just honest with yourself and actually view the things around you for what they are, generalize things, like what is the foundation for all of these things? What is the foundation for governments? What is the foundation for royalty? What is the foundation of, the other various theories that have been promulgated throughout the ages? And if we just go to the foundation, I've said once in one of my videos that if you go to the foundation, you will actually see that none of these assertions have any feet to stand on. And thus, it brings back the notion of having a solid foundation, because they don't. They don't have a solid foundation. It's like a house of cards, tripling over. That they don't have any. There is no substantiation to their foundation. There is nothing legitimate to it. And of course, this has a very large background to it. But just to keep it concise, Cory, not to explain my whole life story here, but actually trying to emphasize the very core of what made me actually reconsider what I once thought was legitimate, which is statism and authoritarianism, and that is being honest with yourself. Looking at things for what they truly are, learn discernment, learn the trivium, learn logical fallacies, logical fallacies. I was very, a logical person when I was a lot younger. So I, was very intrigued by logic, logical fallacies, and trying to filter information by way of these implementing these logical fallacies. Well, logical fallacies galore when we're actually talking about the system of government. If you're honest with yourself, if you're not going to justify in your head, well, oh, there should be a reason for that, like being honest with yourself, that is the primary head starter for this journey into understanding what nature actually is, what our nature is, what the world actually is, and how it all falls together.
Yeah, and sort of when you were saying like being honest with yourself, what comes to mind is that idea of conscience, right? Which we say that we have and that each individual should express, but are we using our conscience to decide what is right and wrong on a day-to-day basis, or are we suppressing that to order follow, to just go with the commands of a political authority? So really good points. Thank you so much for sharing all this great information and breaking down all these concepts. Where could people find a lot more of your works if you want to share all your channels with everybody?
Sure, thank you so much, Cory. Yeah, I have the main place where people recognize me is on YouTube, which is my YouTube channel is called Realization, as the logo states right here. And it's very convenient to have this logo here, actually, so you don't have to actually spell it. But it's like real eyes, as in genuine eyeballs, and Asian. And people will find me there. They can also find me on Odyssey with the exact same name. They will be able to find me on BitChute, and they will be able to find me on Rumble as well. And they could also visit my primary headquarters, if you will, which is my website, realization.com. And if I could just end with some words of encouragement,
please.
Based on like what we've said, like pride and ego, don't cut them out. Pride, which is the pride will build courage, which is what the entire truth and freedom community, so-called, is actually largely devoid of in my viewpoints. Which is actually, understanding pride will build courage, because you're not going to view the people, the quote people in authority, you're not going to view them all the way up here. You're going to view them down here, because that's what they are. Actually, they are actually, obviously, when we're talking about the conscience of these people, they are less than what a genuine human being actually is in terms of morality and philosophy. I mean, actually, just have you seen these people? Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, do I need to go on? I mean, look at them. Are we to be discouraged by their authority? Are you having a bloody laugh? So, that's why they have to break your inherent pride, to make them to make you view them up here when they're actually very low individuals. And ego, stand with it. When you know you can achieve something, then you do it. You can achieve everything you wish to aspire to. It will build motivation. True, healthy ego will build motivation. People will be motivated and steadfast in this road towards true freedom, because they know they can achieve it. Don't think don't think you can. Know you can. And lastly, care. You have to care about freedom. And obviously this is more personal, but largely people today care more about comforts. And, this comes back to what we just said about, responsibility and what have you not. But they care more about comfort than freedom. But once again, when you know that you are worth more than a slave with just privileges that can be taken away from you and given to you at the behest of someone who claims to own you, you will know that you will not be treated like that. You are worthy of true freedom and not just privileges that are granted by slow-witted idiots. Freedom is your birthright, so don't let them, as the famous aphorism goes, don't let them tread on you.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's Alexander Raskovich. Thank you so much. Realization, everybody check out his works. Like I said, really good, detailed information. He's got videos really well professionally edited and very simple to the point on many different topics. You even go into the trivium and that learning method of how we can understand how to think to begin with and how to critically think. To go even further, you go into viruses and germs, and you've talked to doctors. You've done all sorts of really good information that I think people can also look into aside from this. And so, thank you so much for joining me, Alexander, and thank you everybody for watching. Take care. This is the end of Slavery Summit. This is Cory Angelat here with Alexander Raskovich. Take care.
The end of Slavery Summit. I'm so glad that you joined this great event with so many fortunate speakers that I did not expect to have on this summit, and for it to get as big as it has gotten. It was shared across many different news sites, it was shared across many different content creators, and I'm very thankful really just to talk to all these individuals, and I hope maybe I can meet you as well if you decide to get involved, because at the end of all these days, I know you're watching this perhaps on day one, well, at the end of all these days, we're going to delve deep into action. We're going to talk a lot about action steps, and you're going to have practical steps where you can look at all the resources that are out there, and there's a lot you can do, which a lot of people don't talk about. You know, and it's not like I'm the biggest content creator. I really am not. I'm very small. But just imagine what some content creators can do with millions of people, because that's the audience that's out there of people that want freedom. It's millions of people, I would say. And so we need to consider that we need to reach the resources and bring the knowledge to them to unify our efforts, and we can make a really big impact in this world. Frankly, there's no event like this online. And I'm just very grateful to have gotten about 50 speakers. I thought 50 on the top of my head when I first, started about the summit. Then we hit about 20. I'm like, this is good. I can deal with 20. And then all of a sudden we just got more and more speakers, and then we had all these big names. I'm like, what's going on, But really, I'm thankful for everybody also who have shared, not just because it's Thanksgiving, all right? I'm thankful just for everything. I've conducted these interviews over the past couple months. This is entirely a one-man project, and I don't plan to get any funds from this. If there's funds from the t-shirt store, because you have to make money off of that, basically I would use it for the website and for other future projects, because there are going to be future projects, and I want you to stay tuned for that. Keep in mind that there's going to be more free gifts every single day and a lot of helpful videos, and by a lot I mean, well, there's about 60 free books and resources, there's about 60 or so helpful videos, in addition to about 50 or so interviews. That's the estimation of the amount of resources, and that's quite a lot, okay? Because each day you're going to have to choose who you want to listen to and what you want to look into, and of course you could always look into it deeper because you have people's own personal website links in addition to the resources links, and it just, you can go down a rabbit hole all day. The point is that you want to understand the fundamentals as to why we're talking about slavery and how does that help us toward achieving freedom. Okay, it's a new perspective, one that not a lot of people take. I call myself an abolitionist. You can start to do that yourself if you feel like the message is really important. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out, and your questions could also get answered toward the end of the summit. Or, if you want to email me or some of the speakers, feel free to reach out. Network with the speakers, network with all the people that are involved. There's also a catalog for all the topics that are mentioned that will also be at the end of the summit, and like I said, tons of actions and a live stream roundtable, so be sure to look forward to that. This isn't just some speaking event. This is going to lead to a lot more other events, so you have to stay tuned if you care about freedom, of course. And if you are left-leaning or you're right-leaning, you will not really be able to fight this utter complete truth. And maybe you come from that background. I did myself and many others, as you can tell from the interviews. I also ask people their personal experience experience, a lot of us came from different backgrounds. Some of us didn't get involved in politics at all. Some of us were like the most obedient, including myself. And yet we turn to this worldview of saying, wow, look at the world around us. It's not actually that we're free, we're actually enslaved, and we can define what slavery is, and we can prove it, and we have the history, and we have the abolitionist own writings, we have all of it. And it's so evident that it's really hard if you wanted to fight it. And I encourage you really critically think about these concepts. I don't want you to just accept the information, think it's the truth, think slavery's still going on. I want you to think about it, question it, criticize it, make your own videos if you have to. I want to see people out there getting this conversation out there about statism, about this belief in authority, about governments, the nature of law and these systems, right? The alternative systems we can build as opposed to that. Because there's a lot that could be said and there's a lot that could be done. And I'm sure that you probably have some insight that other people have not talked about. And even if you feel like you don't, well, guess what? You're an outsider. You live your own life. You have unique experiences. You absolutely do. And there's always something that you can do that other people cannot do. So have faith in yourself, but also have faith in the message, right? Because there's people like me out there who are willing to fight very hard for this message by all means, of all means of education, doing everything I can, even though, you know, I'm a small channel and I've always been growing, and I never expected to talk to all these people, never expected to do all the interviews or to set the summit. And I'm like, hey, you know, if you have the resources, you can do it. I'm one person setting up an event as big as this with 50 speakers, and if I can do that, you can do that. Absolutely, you know? So feel free to clip, archive any of the interviews, put it on your channel before I put it on my channel, you know? Get it out there. You are the one that makes it famous. Just make the message famous. I don't care if you get all the traction. Make the message, the information important, because that is what I'm here to deliver. I'm not here for my benefit. All the information in the summit is from the speakers themselves. And sure, I have some of my videos and some of my, you know, resources that I create for people, but that is for you still to use. You know, that's still for the average public. Everything I create is for you and other people and for everybody to get together. So we care about the knowledge, we care about what's going on in the world, and keep in mind that there's always more resources, always more to be done. So if you want to really make a difference, then this is the event for you, and you're not going to see this anywhere online. I thank you very much for watching and for joining the summit. This is Cory Engelot. Nature is the answer. Take care. Slavery is the claim of ownership over the life or property of another individual. It is the antithesis of freedom. This definition applies to all forms of identified slavery throughout history. The slavery most people think of is chattel slavery, which was generally and mostly abolished in the 19th century. Today, there are still modern forms of slavery. Professor Kevin Bales states that slavery is theft, theft of work, theft of life, theft even of the children a slave might have borne. Many abolitionists were seen as radical for their views to end slavery, and they were also pointing to many other forms of slavery at the time. Abolitionist Lysander Spooner, for instance, spoke of political slavery, particularly stating that it is whatever allowed or maintained chattel slavery. When we consider the idea of theft, what is taxation but people justifying the theft of the property of another? If you are claiming ownership over something that belongs to someone else, you are claiming that you own what they own. Are you to tell them what to do with their own life and be a slave master? Government is just people, but it is people continuously committing the action of slavery. Government, or the state, is based on statism, the belief that there is such a thing as authority vested in certain human beings, magically giving them the right to rule over other people. This authority means that certain people have the moral right to issue commands to those who they rule, those under their jurisdiction, and that their subjects or slaves have a moral obligation to obey the arbitrary dictates or laws set by their masters. Most simply put, statism is the belief in the legitimacy of slavery and the legitimacy of government. In case you do not understand, answer the following questions. Number 1. Do you have the moral right to rule or dominate another individual against their will? Number 2. Does anyone have the moral right to rule or dominate you if you don't want them to rule or dominate you? Number 3. Does anyone have a legitimately higher claim over your life and property than you? Number 4. Do you have a legitimately higher claim over the life and property of another? Number 5. Do you have a legitimate right to steal your neighbor's stuff? Number 6. Does anyone have the legitimate right to steal your stuff? Number 7. If you don't have the right to steal from or harm another person, can you confer that right that you don't have onto another person or group? Number 8. Is there any means by which any number of individuals can delegate to someone else the moral right to do something which none of the individuals have the moral right to do themselves? Number 9. Do those who wield political power, presidents, legislators, etc., have the moral right to do things which other people do not have the moral right to do? If so, from whom and how did they acquire such a right? Number 10. Is there any process, constitutions, elections, legislation, by which human beings can transform an immoral act into a moral act without changing the act itself? Number 11. When lawmakers and law enforcers use coercion and force in the name of law and government, do they bear the same responsibility for their actions that anyone else would who did the same thing on his own? Number 12. When there is a conflict between an individual's own moral conscience and the commands of a political authority, is the individual morally obligated to do what he personally views as wrong in order to obey the law? Number 13. Do you think two people have a right to trade with each other independent of any third party if they want to? Number 14. Can you limit slavery or violence if it's seen by everyone as legitimate? Number 15. If stealing 100% of the product of someone's labor is slavery, at what percentage is it not slavery? Number 16. How does every order in government get carried out? By who and how? Number 17. Who seeks or desires power? And number 18. Did you actually consent to be within a government? Government is known as a monopoly on violence. It cannot be limited because its violence is seen as legitimate. The action of slavery condoned by statism leads to the condition of slavery, the government state. Following orders cannot be a justification for carrying out wrong behavior, yet the belief in statism makes it a necessary duty, even moral and brave. Being that the word taxation is just another word for theft, yet people see it as moral rather than immoral, this is an example of slavery covert rather than overt. Being that statism is a belief system that leads to the action of slavery, this is an example of what many writers have called, quote, the worst form of slavery, being mental slavery, that leads inevitably to physical slavery. History tells us that government never protects the rights of individuals, that its existence ever only violates the rights of individuals. A good example is America itself. The deception that one man-made system can work for everyone or stay limited in power or for select functions is the promise told for centuries on end, only to end up justifying more political slavery. The Hegelian dialectic that one political party or candidate goes against another is the centuries on end strategy of divide and conquer, using emotional appeal, dishonest identities, deception, media propaganda, and dependence for change, justifying more political slavery. Every law is backed by the threat of violence if people do not comply, if people are not statists or slaves. Those who carry out the violence are the willing statists, the complicit slave drivers. In the 19th century, there existed the slave patrol, which is attributed to modern-day policing. The badges today are still similar to those back then. These are willing statists. A voluntary government would not be any government. Democide, the top cause of unnatural death, is known as death by government. A good example is World War II. People say it is a necessary evil, and so the same could be said of slavery. They still admit to it being evil, so what is not evil? Do you ever consider the necessary good? I repeat, if slavery is legitimized at all, it will inevitably grow. Just replace the word slavery with government, and you will also see that all the excuses and fears made for its existence is practically the same. Here are the claims made against the abolition of slavery. Slavery has always existed. Government has always existed. Every society has slavery. Every society has government. Slaves are not capable of taking care of themselves. The people are not capable of taking care of themselves. Without slavery, there would be chaos. Well, without government, there would be chaos. Trying to get rid of slavery is foolishly utopian. Trying to get rid of government is foolishly utopian. Forget abolition, a far better plan is to keep the slaves sufficiently well-fed, clothed, and housed, and occasionally entertained, and to take their minds off the exploitation by encouraging them to focus on the better life that awaits them in the hereafter. Well, forget abolition. A far better plan is to keep the people sufficiently well-fed, clothed, housed, and occasionally entertained to take their minds off their exploitation. Without slavery, who will pick the cotton? Well, without government, who will build the roads? There will be slavery anyways. Well, there will be government anyways. Government provides nothing new. It only steals somewhere to provide elsewhere. It claims presumed authority for ownership over all the land, all the businesses, and all the people of said land. Government, from etymology, the Latin verb governare or gubernare, means to control, combined with the Latin noun mens or mentis, means the mind. To control the mind. People imposing their will on other people with violence, this is a claim of ownership, as it is dictating the fate of other people's lives. The first government, Sumeria, was the first form of systemic slavery. Every government since practiced slavery. Historically, people first became slaves as a result of government war or government jailing systems. Those who partake in war are willing statists. Nobody has the right to enslave or commit violence upon a fellow human being. No outfit, no position, no title, no bloodline. If you aren't thinking for yourself here as to what is right and wrong, you may still be mentally enslaved. I interviewed over 50 different ex-statists from many different backgrounds. Some were also ex-order followers, directly partaking in acts of slavery. They realized they were wrong, and so was myself, and you can admit it too. It's not easy, but we must. We want a free and voluntary world with many solutions and not just one, having the encouragement of teaching morality and being responsible. This is a world of innovation, a world without large-scale war or legitimized violence making evil ever more evil. A quote from Jeremy Locke, the author of The End of All Evil, states, "Personal sovereignty is the end of evil, when every person on earth will defend themselves and those they love, when evil cannot gain even a foothold because all people are watching for it, and recognize that it seeks to destroy their value. This is the exact opposite of perfect evil, in which every person is a slave and a master of slaves. Perfect liberty is life, and in it there are no slaves and no masters of slaves. Perfect liberty is life." Ownership is a practice required for freedom, health, and order alike. And it's time humanity owns up to their own ownership, otherwise they will continue to be owned. Quite literally, they will get owned, abolished themselves. Give up some of your ownership more and more to someone who does not properly own it, and the next thing you know, you come to own close to nothing. You are owned, and in dependence, you are a slave. Recognize it earlier, you're less of a slave, but still a slave. Recognize it later, welcome to tyranny, until you learn the lesson of abolitionism and what slavery really is, and has always been. Your comfort and false sense of security does not last forever, unless your life is truly in your own hands. Slave masters will use you for their own benefit. They have life in their own control. But nobody deserves to be a slave or to be used by another person. You are not a slave by nature. Do not allow yourself to become enslaved. If we all learn to control ourselves, voluntarily defend our property, and set up voluntary systems as we educate, we need no external control by slavery. Natural leaders seek no authority, and truth is our authority. All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out all this time. If anybody stayed the whole time, but I know it's pretty late in certain parts of the world, especially where I am. Either way, if you signed up for the summit, you can watch any of these anytime, including Stephen Magger. Stephen Magger is one of the interviews I did not show on today's stream because we talk about all sorts of things that aren't always platform friendly. But if you want to check that out, feel free to sign up for the summit. Go to endofslavery.org or nita.one/summit, and you can check it out. Or just look up the End of Slavery Summit. That works too. But some of you guys are probably sick of me saying that so many times at this point. But it's been great. And honestly, day one is more repetitive than a lot of other days because it's more so just going over fundamentals. But other days are going to have a lot more variety and all sorts of different topics. So that will be very cool. At the end, of course, there will be action. I want to say thank you to DK if you're still in the chat. Maybe, maybe not. He stuck around for like 90% of it. But thank you for moderating the chat, helping me do that. And yeah, guys, stay tuned for day 2. I'll stream tomorrow and every day the summit occurs. And of course, we'll be streaming more in the future as well. Thank you, and Amos, welcome. Awaken Your Mind, welcome to the stream, and nice to have you here. Maybe restream? Yeah, please restream it. Feel free. Yeah, that's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. You know what I mean? Like, you can promote this content first before I start promoting it. Like, you know, publishing the videos and making everything public, what have you. Go ahead, do it, because right now it's all, you know, behind the wall of signing up. But, you know, I want people to clip it and share it to their own channels, yada yada, because it helps with you know, getting the message out there. That's the whole point. And so that's why I'm doing many different methods of getting out there. And thank you for everybody watching on Twitch and YouTube, streaming to both platforms at once. And everybody, take care. Good night if you're at night, and good morning if you're in the morning. All right, take care. loud music.